Chapter 420, Interrupting the Red Tree. Everything happened in an instant. Chi Wuhai, the tyrant bear, fell to the ground with a single thunderous blow. Kid and Apu's crews broke out in a cold sweat, their eyes wide with disbelief. Even the two infamous captains themselves froze, utterly stunned. Could this really be the strength of the world's strongest man? As Chi Wuhai's massive body hit the deck, a sickening crack of bone echoed through the clearing. Then, nothing. The bear lay still. Nethan stood alone amidst the stunned onlookers. He withdrew his hand slowly, as if removing it from a dying ember, and turned to face Kid and Apu. His expression was cool, almost bored. He had no personal vendetta against them. One was notorious for wanton slaughter of civilians, the other for delighting in torturous flayings. But neither quality impressed him. Two so-called supernovas of this generation? Pathetic. He tilted his head slightly, eyes narrowing. A dull throb of dread pulsed through Kid and Apu's hearts as they heard the calm authority in his voice. "You two," Nithin began, pausing just long enough to let his words sink in, "are such poor specimens that venturing into the new world would only humiliate you." He sniffed dismissively. Humph. With that, he turned his back on them, leaving the two captains and their crew to stare after him, worried, angry, and utterly outmatched. Nethin lifted his foot and tapped the ground, and in an instant the earth trembled with a thunderous roar. Kid and Apu, along with their men, were thrown off balance, stumbling and wearing expressions of pure terror. "This is bad! Retreat!" Without another thought, Kid and Apu abandoned their plan to confront Nethin. They spun on their heels, fought to steady themselves, and then bolted, desperate to put distance between them and the young warrior. But Nethin didn't bother to give chase. He simply curled his hand into a fist. A dark, twisting energy coalesced around his knuckles as he casually swung his arm in their direction. A low hum swelled in the air, then exploded outward in a savage wave of distortion. This was Nethin's new power, unlocked when he defeated the Beast King Kaido and reached 900 points of twisting energy. Even he couldn't say exactly how strong his punch had become. To him, it felt like nothing more than flicking his wrist at thin air, and yet the impact was cataclysmic. With a deafening boom, the shockwave tore through the landscape, obliterating everything in its path. Nethin's casual gesture had become a weapon of unimaginable force, and Kid and Apu were caught squarely in its wake. Kid and Apu barely registered the terrifying force bearing down on them. They braced themselves, let out a roar. Then, in less than a heartbeat, they were torn to pieces like rotten wood. Splinters and gore sprayed outward as the whirlwind of Nethin's twisted fist continued its arc, hurtling straight into the great Argan thornbark mangrove behind them. Boom! A deafening crack split the air. A deep, fist-shaped gouge carved itself into the giant crimson trunk. In an instant, half the colossal tree exploded into shards, its thick bark shearing away like glass. The impact left a hollow crater the exact shape of a fist. The surrounding wood splintered and scorched. Nethin withdrew his hand and ran a finger through his tousled hair. The remaining half of the mangrove shuddered on its roots, creaking ominously. With a final, shattering groan, it gave way, branches, roots, and timber collapsing into a tangled heap. The gathered crowd fell silent, then erupted in shock and dismay. "Not another one! Those Arganthornbarks are nearly extinct as it is. Master Yellowape is too reckless. There goes half the forest again." Off in the distance, the naval officers stationed on the island watched the scene unfold with growing dread. Their scalps tingled and their hands grew slick with sweat. The Tianlong squadron had been routed so severely that the world government had seen fit to dispatch Admiral Huang Yuan, nicknamed the Yellow Ape, in person. No sooner had he landed than he delivered a thunderous kick to a yerky mangrove tree. Moments later, they spotted another tree, this one an Alcamon species, shattered to splinters. Hearts sank. Even the world's most decorated general would be condemned if he were caught destroying two protected Alcamon mangroves. Colonel and lieutenant alike exchanged helpless glances. There was no arguing their admiral's culpability. At the same time, on the opposite side of the island, Nethin and the Straw Hat crew were in the thick of a brutal engagement with the world government's latest war machines, the pacifistas. Despite fighting shoulder to shoulder, the pirates found themselves steadily pressed back. Blinding laser beams streaked across the battlefield, each strike triggering deafening explosions that rocked the ground. The pacifistas lived up to their fearsome reputation, relentless, unyielding, and all but unstoppable, especially when faced by fighters who hadn't even claimed a supernova bounty, let alone braved the new world. As the skies lit up with incendiary flashes, Nethan gritted his teeth, steeling himself for the desperate struggle ahead. In the new world, bounties north of 300 or even 400 million berries are nothing to sneeze at. Fighters who can truly dominate the battlefield are rare. Most so-called powerhouses aren't much tougher than your average pirate, and our target so far hasn't given us any real trouble. But today, Sanji, Zoro, and Luffy decided to end it once and for all. First came Sanji's devil wind kick, his trademark finishing touch. Before the pacifist pirate could even react, Zoro roared up from behind, Ghost Asura 9 sword style, Demon 9 flashes. And then Luffy, pumping every last ounce of power into his rubber fist, unleashed Gear 3's giant roundhouse. Boom! The three attacks struck simultaneously in a perfect pincer maneuver. Bones cracked under the assault, and their foe's body twisted with the force of the blow. When the smoke cleared, the battered pirate lay motionless, his bounty and reputation in tatters. Luffy's inflations deflated, and he slumped to one knee, panting so hard his tongue lolled out. Zoro leaned on his sword, chest heaving. Sanji toppled onto one knee, already lightheaded. They were each running on empty. "Stop moving," Luffy wheezed. He managed a wide grin. "Now that was awesome." Usopp, who'd been watching from the sidelines, let out a long, trembling breath of relief. Sanji lit a cigarette with shaky fingers, exhaling smoke like steam from a kettle. "Phew," he said, voice raspy. "We'd better find somewhere to rest before we collapse. If this fight dragged on any longer, we'd be in worse shape than if an admiral showed up." "I couldn't agree more," Nami added, cheeks flushed from the tension. She offered each of them a tired smile, grateful that the worst of the battle was finally over. Nethan staggered to his feet, chest heaving. He and his crewmates were utterly spent. There was no way they could keep fighting. He let out a ragged chuckle. "Huh, of course." Before anyone could react, distant thuds resounded through the broken walls. Every head whipped around as another pacifist agent clanked into view, emerging from the rubble with mechanical precision. Sanji's face went chalk white. Usopp's usual bravado melted into pure terror. Robin froze mid-breath, eyes wide. Nami raised her climate baton, knuckles whitening. "How many of these things are there?" she breathed. The agent's optic sensors locked onto them. Its badge flashed. Beep, beep! And a searing beam of energy shot straight toward the group. "Fall back!" Sanji yelled, vaulting over debris to dodge the blast. He caught Nethan's eye. "We're done for if we stay here. One more hit and we're finished. Split up. Every last one of you, get out of here." With no better plan, the crew scattered into the ruins, each desperately seeking an escape from the relentless enforcer. Luffy recognized the urgency, barely dodged the laser blast, and called out to everyone. Chapter 421, Please Don't Get in the Way. The wanted poster stared down at them. 300 million berries, pirate captain Straw Hat Luffy. The giant pacifista's mechanical eye locked onto Luffy, flickering like a faulty bulb before it sprang to life. With a metallic whir, it unleashed twin palm lasers in rapid succession. Luffy tumbled aside, eyes wide. "Whoa!" he gasped, scrambling to his feet and darting through the crew as they scattered across the deck. "Now, Usopp!" Sanji shouted. Usopp's teeth ground together. He grabbed a smoke bomb from his pouch, lit the fuse, and flung it at the pacifista's feet. The device erupted in a roaring cloud of black powder. "Smoke screen!" Usopp howled, vaulting backward. Sanji, Zoro, Chopper, and the others dashed into cover under the billowing veil. But the pacifista's sensors recalibrated instantly. It leaped out of the smoke, tracking Luffy's every movement. A scorching beam cut through the haze, grazing Luffy's side. The aftershock slammed into him, and he cried out as his body flew across the deck with a thunderous crash. "Luffy!" From the opposite side of the deck, Nithan watched in horror. He clenched his fists, each muscle craving to spring into action, but his strength had drained away. His legs trembled, every bone ached. He wanted, desperately, to help, to fire off a blast or land a punch, but his body wouldn't obey. Before he could wrestle with indecision, a calm voice spoke right in front of him. "You still have the heart to care about others, Nonoroya, Nithan." Sauron's eyes widened in shock, but before he could counter, Huang Yuan drove a boot into his chest. The impact sent Sauron flying backward in a shower of dust and debris. He crashed into the ground with a thunderous crack, coughing up blood as bruises and lacerations spread across his body. From a safe distance, Lu Fei and the others watched in horror. Their hearts pounded and their muscles tensed as the smoke cleared to reveal the attacker, the notorious yellow ape, Huang Yuan, standing motionless with his hands in his pockets. "You," one of Lu Fei's companions whispered, teeth clenched. "He's finished." Huang Yuan casually surveyed Sauron's battered form. "Sauron," he said, voice cold as steel, "the famed pirate hunter now wearing the black flag. Bounty's 120 million, yet here you are, attacking your own kind. Pirates leave the worst memories, don't they?" He narrowed his eyes, every inch the predator. "You went down from a single strike. Sounds like you're seriously hurt. Take a good rest." Without another word, he shifted his weight, coiling energy around his raised foot. Bright, crackling light gathered at his boot, ready to rain down another devastating blow. Nethin had once been a feared pirate hunter. Now he'd completed his turn and become a pirate himself. The yellow ape on deck scowled at him, itching for a fight. Who knew there wasn't some hidden power Nethin could unleash? If he could be killed, best to do it now. "Nethin!" Usopp and Brooks screamed in unison when they saw Nethin frozen in place, unable to dodge the ape's devastating strike. Across the deck, Sanji's face went ashen. He ground his teeth. No, his body's reached its limit. Panicked, Usopp dropped behind a barrel, loaded his slingshot, and fired. The pebble flew straight through the yellow ape's torso as if it weren't there. Brooks surged forward, sword raised, but his blade passed through the beast's chest without leaving a scratch. Usopp staggered back. It's like we're attacking thin air." "What's going on?" The yellow ape straightened, eyes narrowing, lips curling into a cruel grin. In a low, rumbling voice, he said, "Your attacks are useless. That old man is a Logia. He ate the shine fruit, a natural-type devil fruit. His body has become elemental. You can't hurt him with normal weapons." Nethin landed beside the clamor of clashing blades, just in time to intercept Huang Yuan's crushing kick. The yellow ape's eyes narrowed to slits as he drove his foot toward his fallen foe, but before the blow could connect, a brilliant arc of swordlight tore through the air. It swept across the sandy clearing like a bolt of lightning, aimed squarely at Huang Yuan's midsection. Huang Yuan's face flickered with surprise. Killing Sauron had been his only goal, but instinct drove him to reach out in defense. His arm shimmered and elongated, reshaping itself into a radiant golden blade that met the incoming slash. Clang! The two energies collided in a blinding flash, showers of sparks spraying around them. The yellow ape staggered back, panting, but Sauron, lying just beyond, was safe. A low, mocking laugh rose from Huang Yuan as he sheathed his makeshift sword. "Well, now it's your turn, Ghost Hand." He stared across the battlefield at the newcomer, Nethin, whose unexpected intervention had saved the pirate's life. Nethin's cloak billowed in the wind as he faced down his towering opponent. Across the clearing, another figure advanced. Lei Li, the legendary Hades Rayleigh, known as the King of the Underworld. He walked calmly, one hand resting on the hilt of his broadsword. Word had reached Navy headquarters of the Whitebeard pirates' rampage here, but they had no inkling that Rayleigh had also come. To confront the Whitebeards was one thing, but to face them alongside Hades Rayleigh was unthinkable. And now, with Nethin standing against them, the naval forces would be overwhelmed. Huang Yuan's grin widened. He glanced first at Rayleigh, then at Nethin. "I heard you visited this island more than once," he said softly. "So the rumors are true." His eyes glittered with anticipation. Let's see if the legendary Ghost Hand can live up to his name. With that, the yellow ape charged forward once more, ready to test Nethin's mettle, and to determine the fate of everyone caught between these three fearsome legends. Admiral Kizaru's gaze remained unflinching as Rayleigh slowly pushed the hatch open. Stepping forward, Rayleigh's voice was steady. "If you withdraw Nethin's arrest warrant, he and his crewmates can live here in peace for the years to come." Kizaru's eyes narrowed. "You can't just wipe away a pirate's crimes, least of all those of the Roger pirates." "Oh?" Rayleigh stroked his beard, feigning sudden recollection. "I'd have forgotten if you hadn't reminded me. It appears Nethin is stuck in his current predicament precisely because you refused to lift that warrant. For a heartbeat, the Admiral's expression flickered with something like regret. You came all this way to champion those brats? Some habits die hard, pirate, but if you insist on protecting them, know that we'll be prepared. Rayleigh bowed his head, one hand drifting to the sword at his side. Come on, Kizaru, show some mercy. Let them go, brother. I'm begging you. Admiral Huang Yuan lifted his gaze and spoke coldly. Those boys attacked the celestial dragons. If we don't detain them, how can Navy headquarters hold its head high in Marioa? Step aside. A tense silence fell. Then 2 more pacifistas emerged and advanced from the flanks. Now 3 towering war machines steadily closed in on Luffy and his friends. Ordinarily, Vice Admiral Kizaru's light-speed beams could take down a pacifista single-handedly, but here he was already at the limit, his energy fully committed to keeping them at bay. He couldn't spare the power to protect Luffy. Huang Yuan knew it all too well, and felt no hurry to press Rayleigh further. Sweat beaded on Luffy's brow. Trapped between 3 pacifistas, no one in the crew stood a chance. Just as the standoff threatened to freeze solid, a new voice rang out from the rear. They rescued a mermaid. If you won't let them go, Nethan, my ghost hand, will lose every scrap of prestige with the merfolk of Murloc Island. So tell me, are you really going to block us over a few celestial dragons? A teasing lilt colored the newcomer's voice, so light it carried no weight, yet the instant it reached Huang Yuan and Rayleigh, both their faces stiffened. Huang Yuan gaped in astonishment, and though Rayleigh's brow shot up in surprise, relief quickly followed. He hadn't expected Nethan to show up. Now that he was here, everything would fall into place. Rayleigh had already pieced it together. Murloc Island was Nethan's domain, and Luffy and his crew had come ashore to rescue the mermaid Cammy. In fact, the very clash between Luffy and the Dragon Man had been triggered by Cammy's abduction. Chapter 422, The Yellow Ape's Escape. Ah, it's Uncle! Luffy gasped the moment he spotted Nethan's silhouette on the horizon. Nethan, lost in thought, barely registered the shout. When did I become uncle level in everyone's eyes? He wondered. Luffy's grin stretched from ear to ear, but Zoro, Sanji, and the others froze in place, their expressions growing stiff. Above them, however, the real terror sat swinging from the yardarm, the pirate known as Yellow Ape. He'd come cruising in with nothing but confidence, planning to rough up a few furry kids, only to see a Pluton-class cannon suddenly wreck the deck, and now, here was Nethan himself. No wonder I skipped the almanac before sailing out. Yellow Ape cursed under his breath. Rumors of Nethan's swift destruction of the 100 Beasts pirates had spread like wildfire in just days, but to find him here, at the Chambord Islands? Could Nethan be scouting for the looming war against Whitebeard? A cold shiver ran down Yellow Ape's spine. The more he thought about it, the clearer it became that things were about to get very, very bad. His weathered face twisted into a grimace of dread. At that moment, 3 silent figures stepped forward, their bodies a strange fusion of flesh and machinery. Nethan recognized them immediately. The so-called pacifists, humans transformed into living weapons and programmed to apprehend pirates at any cost. In unison, all 3 emitted a sharp series of beeps, then snapped to attention, facing the crew. At that signal, Faye and her squad struck. Boom, boom, boom! 3 searing laser beams shot out from different angles, catching Luffy's team completely off guard. Shouts of surprise echoed across the deck as each crewmate barely managed to dodge, tumbling this way and that. Nami screamed, too. She leaped to avoid the blasts, yet one scorching aftershock still clipped her. The force sent her hurtling skyward, and in midair she twisted toward Nethan's position. Sanji, caught in the same shockwave, flip-flopped above the deck beside her. Without a second thought, Nethan lunged forward. He thrust out his left hand and, almost effortlessly, plucked Nami from the air. Sanji, meanwhile, lost his grip and splatted onto the deck with a heavy thud. Breathing hard, Nethan cradled Nami in his arms. Sanji crawled over, a dark cloud of exasperation passing over his features as he noted the rescue. His lip twitched in both gratitude and envy. "Thank you, so much," Nami stammered, her voice still shaky. Nethan gently set her back on her feet. Just then, one of the pacifists advanced toward them, its mechanical limbs whirring. "Miss Nami, please come with us," it intoned. Nami met Nethan's eyes for a fleeting moment, confusion and resolve mingling in her gaze, then turned toward the looming threat. When Sanji spotted the fishman guard rushing toward them, a carp-like creature leapt up before Nami, nodding respectfully as if to block her path. Nami didn't even answer. Instead, she turned those large, pleading eyes to Nethan. The guard cleared his throat, cocked his head at him, and stammered, "Please, can you save us?" Nami's expression was so achingly vulnerable, her eyes wide, her cheeks still flushed from their earlier clash, that anyone would have felt a surge of protectiveness. Even Sanji, standing at her side, winced and spat out a mouthful of blood, as if struck by the force of her plea. For all Nethan knew, she could be faking it, but even if she weren't, he wasn't about to let sympathy decide his actions. He met Nami's gaze a moment longer, wondering how much of her desperation was real. Her beauty was undeniable, but that alone wouldn't move him. At last, he gave one word for an answer. No. He remembered all too well how this mess began. Luffy and his crew had swooped in uninvited on Murloc Island to rescue a mermaid, stealing Nethan's chance to carry out the mission he'd been assigned. They'd robbed him of his moment, and he hadn't forgotten. Nethan sprang forward without hesitation. Even as the towering pacifista loomed over him, it opened at its mouth and unleashed a blinding beam of light aimed straight at Nami and himself, clearly intending to eliminate them both at once. But Nethan had anticipated the attack. With an almost imperceptible flick of his finger, he caught the golden laser mid-air. Snick! In an instant, the beam reversed course, streaking back along its original path. Before the pacifista could close its jaws, the redirected blast slammed into its mouth with a thunderous roar. Plates of metal cracked and splintered in a harsh electric staccato. Nami, who'd watched in horror as that same laser had once driven Sauron, Luffy, and the others to their knees, now felt her throat go dry with disbelief. Mere moments ago, that fearsome weapon had seemed unstoppable. Now it lay mangled within the cyborg's shattered frame. "Impressive," muttered Huang Yuan from the sidelines, his weathered face creasing into a grudging smile. Even Lei Li, standing nearby, dared not step forward. Nethan steadied himself and spoke two words that rippled across the battlefield. "Ghost Hand." Then he turned his gaze to the golden-skinned marine officer, the man they all called the Yellow Ape, and raised his voice so every soldier could hear. "The mermaids of Fishman Island are not for sale or enslavement. That is my decree." Silence fell. Even the damaged pacifista, its once confident posture broken, seemed to regard Nethan with new and wary respect. Nethan frowned, massaging his temple. He hadn't expected anyone to flat-out ignore his orders. Huang Yuan knew the uproar all began with a trafficked mermaid, but he never imagined Nethan would show up in person over a single captive sea creature. It was almost laughable. In the past, Whitebeard had stood guard over Murloc Island. Though mermaid abductions still occurred from time to time, no one dared to make it a habit, and Whitebeard certainly couldn't chase down every minor offense. Yet here was Nethan, as if anything within his domain fell squarely on his shoulders. Tilting his head, Nethan looked down at the stunned Yellow Ape. "Tell me," he said coolly, "what made you think you could stand your ground while I was right here? Are you that foolish?" Before Huang Yuan could even register the question, Nethan's fist rocketed forward and caught him square in the jaw. A thunderous shockwave ripped through the clearing, and Huang Yuan's eyes widened in panic. With a single, desperate motion, he blurred into a golden streak and vanished into the night. A crackling shockwave ripped through the air, and in an instant, Admiral Kizaru was sent hurtling like a fallen star, a streak of golden light trailing behind him. Nethan lowered his fist without a second thought. Kizaru's speed and strength were legendary, but today they were no match for him. Had Admiral Akainu been on the scene, Nethan might have considered following up with a second decisive strike, but chasing Kizaru all the way back to Marine headquarters? Not worth the trouble. As the golden beam vanished into the horizon, Nethan allowed himself a dark chuckle. He still felt the sting of Admiral Aokiji's crushing defeat, how he'd once been driven to flee in utter disgrace, and the memory of Kizaru cornering him without mercy. Yet now, with one well-placed blow, he'd forced these towering figures of the Navy to retreat, tails between their legs. The exhilaration that coursed through him was intoxicating. General Sanji and the other officers watched in stunned silence. They all knew Nethan's name, and most had heard the rumors of his power, but never had they imagined he could reduce admirals to fugitives. If even the Navy's greatest champions could not stand their ground, what hope remained for anyone else? Luffy's eyes locked onto Nethan, and for a moment they glittered like a constellation come to life. He's amazing, Luffy breathed, a mix of envy and awe in his voice. Even the toughest Marine admiral would turn tail the moment they laid eyes on him. That's the One Piece I've been chasing. This is the freedom I crave. No one can stop him. No one, even the fleet admiral, stands a chance. Chapter 423. The era will end. Boom, boom. The last two pacifistas barreled toward Luffy, Sauron, and the rest. Nethan tore his gaze away from the others and focused on the advancing machines. With a single, precise flick of his wrist, he released two spiraling currents of energy, each no thicker than a finger. The blast struck squarely into the cyborgs' chests. In an instant, their metal panels buckled inward like collapsing whirlpools, the inner circuitry crackled, and each automaton warped into a twisted lump of scrap. "That's enough. Stand down," Nethan said coolly, straightening his fingers. Nami, who had been flung to the ground by the pacifista's assault, blinked her eyes open. Relief and gratitude lit her face as she stumbled to her feet. "You saved us again, Nethan. Thank you, but everyone got badly hurt trying to follow your orders." Nethan tilted his head, concern flickering across his expression. "Injured? Where exactly are you hurt? Come here. I'll take a look." Sanji, standing at Nami's side, inhaled sharply at the promise of Nethan's attention. A gleam danced in his eyes and in his nose. Before he could do anything foolish, Zoro materialized beside him, catching Sanji by the scruff of his collar. "What do you think you're doing, pervert?" Zoro growled, steadying the swooning cook. "Hey, get off me, you!" Sanji sputtered, face red. "You bastard!" Zoro's smirk was as sharp as his blade. "Take it easy. Your nosebleeds are going to give you away every time." He tossed Sanji aside and turned back to Nethan. "Are you all right here?" Nethan nodded, already kneeling beside Nami to examine her for injuries. Around them, the dust settled, and somewhere in the distance, a new era lurked on the horizon. Sanji's fury snapped over to Zoro in an instant. Though both men were visibly wounded, the heat of their argument seemed to make those injuries vanish, at least in the midst of their shouting match. Nami froze when Nethan spoke up from the sidelines. "Let me take a look and see how I can make it up to you." He offered her a small, reassuring smile and started across the deck. Alarmed, Nami took a step back. "No, really, I'm fine. It's not that serious," she protested, voice wavering. "And if you're looking for favors, you ought to pick your target more carefully." Nethan only closed the distance, stopping directly in front of her. His eyes glinted with playful intent. "Honestly, it'll be quick, a check for hidden bruises." Nami's panic spiked, and she darted a glance toward Luffy and the others. Zoro and Sanji were still locked in their furious duel. Everyone else was oblivious. Before anyone could notice them leave, Nethan slipped into action. He bent the ambient light and sound around them, curving space until the world outside became a distorted blur. Even a keen observer like Pluto Lay could only register a strange warping in the air. No figures, no whispers, nothing but a subtle ripple. Inside that private fold of reality, Nethan moved with calm precision. He ran his hands gently over Nami's bruised ribs, realigned a misjointed shoulder, and coaxed the last of her aches away. When he was done, he let the field collapse, and light and sound flooded back in. They stood together on the deck as if nothing unusual had happened. Nami rubbed her side, eyes wide with relief. Nethan gave her a cheeky grin and a wink, then turned back just in time to see Zoro land a solid punch on Sanji's arm, resuming the brawl as though no time had passed at all. 3 minutes later, the screen flickered and snapped back to its original display. Nami bit her lip, glancing at Nethan with a mixture of shame and anger before puffing out her cheeks in a pout. Luffy, noticing her unusual expression, leaned forward. "Hey, Nami, what's wrong?" She shot Nethan an aggrieved look. "Nothing," she stammered, though her tone betrayed her frustration. Nethan paid her no mind. To Luffy, he said casually, "I did pick up a few scratches. Some are still bleeding, but nothing serious. Listen, I have an idea. If you ever find yourselves in real danger, you could take refuge in Wano." Nami's eyes widened. She'd been put off by him, and yet Wano sounded intriguing. "Wano," she said slowly. Where is it? My territory's in the New World. Nathan shrugged and glanced over his shoulder, ignoring Luffy's curious stare. There, standing a short distance away, was Rayleigh, watching them with that same cool, inscrutable expression he always wore. When their eyes met, Nathan allowed himself the barest lift of a smile. "Rayleigh," he called. "We go way back, don't we, King of Pluto?" Rayleigh leaned back against the railing, a faint smile on his lips. "Your Excellency is overrated. I once heard rumors of a pirate who massacred Tenryubito in Chambord. Naturally, I wanted to see who possessed such reckless boldness, but the chance never came, until now." He paused, letting the words hang in the night air. Rayleigh may be a legend of the Grand Line, but beside Nathan, he's in a different league. At will, Nathan could challenge Ralph Drew himself. Of the four emperors, only the red-haired Shanks has yet to fall to him, and even Shanks wouldn't be a real match. Admirals? Nathan has crushed them all without breaking a sweat. Though he's never even set foot on Ralph Drew's deck, people already whisper his name as the true embodiment of One Piece. He's defeated every fleet admiral and laid low every emperor. What else could he be called? Nathan said nothing, nor did he show any real interest in taking on Ralph Drew. Yet there was no denying it. He was the era's unrivaled pirate king. Finally, Nathan shook his head, his voice low and cool. "That act in Chambord? It wasn't courage. Without absolute power to back it up, it was nothing more than blind impulse." Rayleigh leaned back and laughed at Nathan's words. "You've only been a pirate for a few years, Nathan. Impulsiveness is part of youth." Nathan grinned, his tone unhurried. "Impulsiveness doesn't stick around as you grow older. It's something you lose with age." Rayleigh fell silent, memories stirring. He thought back to his earliest days aboard Gold D. Rogers' ship, when he swaggered into battle on the Grand Line, brimming with reckless energy. As first mate, he'd made his share of rash decisions, and Roger himself had been even bolder. Now, looking back, Rayleigh felt that familiar pang of nostalgia, tinged with regret. The brilliant recklessness of youth was gone forever. Even Whitebeard wasn't immune to time. Shaking off his reverie, Rayleigh sighed softly. Back then, the Navy and the world government would never have dared make such a gamble. At Whitebeard's prime, even Garp and Sengoku together couldn't have held him back if he'd set his mind to obliterating naval headquarters. The power of his Quake Fruit alone could have leveled the entire complex. Even if they'd somehow emerged victorious, it would have been a hollow triumph. The Navy wouldn't pay such a steep price just to bring Whitebeard down. "Times are changing," Nathan said, his eyes dark with promise. "A new era is on the horizon." Pluto Rayleigh simply nodded and replied, "I wonder if these old bones of mine will live to see it." But time and era are not the same. 22 years ago, after Pirate King Roger's death, the world fell into the golden age of piracy, an age dominated by Whitebeard. With Golden Lion crippled and Roger executed, no one could challenge the man who reigned supreme on the seas. That era belonged to him. Then, a few years ago, when Nathan defeated Whitebeard, authority subtly shifted. Yet it was still called the Golden Age, an age defined by the world government's grasp and the rampant scourge of pirates. What Nathan and Pluto Rayleigh spoke of now was different, a truly new era, one that would no longer bear the name of any pirate, however great. Even though the world government remains vast and seemingly unshakable, the rise of the ghost hand pirates, the political realignments of the nations, and the rapid expansion of the Revolutionary Army have already put its very existence at risk. Nathan understood this all too well. The age of the world government was very likely drawing to a close. Chapter 424, All Preparations. Nathan's sudden arrival at the Chambord Islands sent shockwaves through Marine headquarters. Officers exchanged uneasy glances as rumors swirled. Was he preparing to intervene in the Navy's war with the Whitebeard pirates? True, Whitebeard was one of Nathan's enemies, but facing the full might of the Marines was a far greater gamble. "Report to Fleet Admiral Sengoku immediately," came the sharp order over the comms. Moments later, a senior officer burst into Sengoku's private command chamber, snapping a crisp salute. The admiral sat behind a broad desk, maps and reports strewn before him. At his side, Imperial Conciliator Tsuru watched silently from a low couch. All eyes turned to the newcomer. "Sir," the officer began, still catching his breath, The Ghost Hand Pirates' 1st Division captain has returned to the 10,000 Kingdoms. Their 2nd Division commander, Shiryu, remains holed up in the Beast's Sea, right in the heart of outlaw territory. Sengoku exhaled, relief softening his stern features. If the Ghost Hand Pirates were still consolidating their recent victory over the 100 Beasts Pirates and securing that wild region, they wouldn't be able to divert forces to the coming conflict, at least not for the time being. Tsuru rose, smoothing the front of her robes. "And the other division commanders? Any word on whether they're mobilizing?" she asked quietly. The senior officer hesitated, then shook his head. "Not yet, ma'am. We're keeping watch, but so far there's no indication they're ready to enter the fray." Sengoku leaned back, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully. With the Ghost Hand Pirates temporarily occupied and Nethin's true intentions still unclear, the balance of power in the East Blue and beyond remained delicately poised. The Navy's next moves would have to be calculated with utmost care. Major General Shen Shengui saluted smartly. "Sir, the captain of the 6th Division is still unaccounted for, but we've located the other captains. They're in Wano country." Admiral John Guo leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. After a moment's thought, he spoke quietly but firmly. "Good work. But don't let your guard down. Keep constant surveillance on the Ghost Hand Pirates and relay any movement to me immediately." Shen Shengui nodded. "Yes, Admiral." With that, he turned on his heel and strode from the office. Once the door closed, Commander Qingji lifted his gaze to John Guo. "All their forces are in Wano, then," he observed. "If only the Ghost Hands show up here, we can handle them ourselves." Fleet Admiral Waring States, his expression unreadable beneath the brim of his hat, gave a single, slow nod. "True, even if they dispatch a strong squadron, our headquarters need only detach 2 of our best-ready divisions to suppress Nethin. The rest of our strength remains available to confront the Whitebeard pirates." Qingji tapped a finger on the polished table. "In fact, we didn't need to gather such a massive fleet just to face Whitebeard. The real purpose was twofold: finalize our strategy and prepare for any unforeseen threats." John Guo allowed himself a rare, confident smile. "Then our orders stand. Keep Wano under watch, contain the Ghost Hand, and be ready to redirect forces at a moment's notice. We let neither pirates nor circumstance take us by surprise." The 2 admirals exchanged a look of silent agreement. Beneath the calm surface of the Grand Line, the tides of war were still shifting, and the Marines would be ready for whatever came next. The Navy's 3 alternate commanders, Momodu, T-Fish, and Zephyr, who commands the reserves, won't join the main engagement unless the red-haired pirates actually show up and press the attack. As it stands, the 3 frontline admirals and Fleet Admiral Kiwuhai are more than a match for the Whitebeard pirates on their own. Chambord Island, late afternoon. A warm glow of lantern light spilled across the worn wooden tables of a seaside tavern. At one of those tables sat Nethin and Dark King Ra, Ili, exchanging observations on the New World's ever-shifting balance of power. "Word is, Ace's execution will draw every big player in the Grand Line down to Marineford," Rayleigh mused, swirling the last dregs of his drink. "Whether the Straw Hats turn up remains to be seen." Nethin shrugged, leaning back in his chair. "I've heard the same rumors. Frankly, I don't much care if they join or not. The Navy's got enough muscle to handle Whitebeard's forces without waiting on any pirates." Rayleigh let out a soft chuckle. "Confident as ever, Nethin. I can't argue with you, though. We've got a formidable lineup ready to go." They talked on for a while longer about shifting alliances and possible outcomes at Marineford. When the conversation felt complete, Rayleigh stood and clapped Nethin on the shoulder. "Come on," he said, gesturing to the bar. "Another round, on me this time." Nethin rose to follow, but before they could reach the counter, a gentle voice drifted through the doorway. "Is this seat taken?" Nethin looked up and paused mid-step. There, framed in the tavern's doorway, stood a young mermaid with emerald-green hair cut just above her shoulders. Her tail, folded neatly beneath her, shimmered in the lantern light. Nethin's brow furrowed in recognition. "Cammy?" he said softly. For a moment, the mermaid looked stunned, her eyes widening as she took in Nethin's familiar face. Then her expression shifted to one of astonished delight. "Nethin," she breathed, "is that really you?" Cammy knew Fishman Island's waters like the back of her hand. As one of its mermaids, she was well aware that no outsider had dared trespass here in years, thanks largely to the fierce reputation of Captain Nithin and his ghost hand pirates. Nethin's protection of the island even eclipsed Whitebeard's. Any mermaid captured by slavers would instantly draw the ghost hand's wrath. After only a handful of such daring rescues, word spread fast. No slaver would tangle with Fishman Island again. Today's crisis, Cammy knew, wasn't born of arrogance but of bad luck. A few slavers had stumbled across Cammy while she was stranded on land. "You know me?" Nithin asked, offering Cammy a wry smile as he stepped closer. "I hardly ever visit Fishman Island. It's odd that we've never met." Cammy's heart skipped. Even as a junior mermaid, she should be known to the island's guardian, and surely he'd heard of today's rescue. Before she could answer, Nethin turned to the woman beside her, Lei Li, whose dark tattoos marked her as no stranger to danger. Lei Li laughed, her eyes glinting. "Cammy and I go way back," she said. "We staged the whole thing, posed as captives so we could worm our way in, then ambush the buyer from the inside." Nithin shook his head in disbelief. "I never imagined it would come to this," he admitted, though he knew in his heart there was no other choice but to save her. He lifted his cup, exchanged a knowing look with Rayleigh, and then turned to Cammy, who was lingering at the edge of the deck. "Sit down and relax," he said, gesturing to an empty bench. "By the way, how's Jinbi holding up these days?" Cammy hesitated, then shrugged. "He's still officially one of the 7 warlords of the sea," she replied. "Outwardly, he maintains contact with the world government. Behind the scenes, though, he lends his strength wherever Whitebeard needs him, and as protector of Fishman Island, he's allied with the Sun Pirates. But with war looming, trying to stand on all 3 decks at once is sheer madness. The government used to turn a blind eye, but they won't tolerate it much longer, especially once they learn he's doing more than just observing." Rayleigh leaned forward, his voice low. "Whitebeard has sheltered half the Grand Line's weaker islands. No matter which side emerges victorious, the seas won't know peace for years to come. Jinbei's trying to prevent this conflict, but the world government has him under close watch. They've effectively locked him down. No missions, no freedom of movement." Nithin stood and stretched, tucking one and into his coat. "All right then," he said. "Let's get moving. We need to press on toward the city before word of the crackdown spreads any further." He glanced at Rayleigh and Cammy. "This was exactly the outcome I feared, but it looks like the world's about to be thrown into chaos, whether we like it or not." With that, the 3 of them set off, the horizon dark with the promise of coming storms. Even if Whitebeard survives the Paramount War, he's already 72. How much longer can he realistically hold the title of 4 emperors? Nethin, by contrast, is only 31, young enough that age won't slow him down for decades. Whitebeard, on the other hand, has reached the limits of human endurance. In truth, it was the very conflict at Marineford that drew out the old man's last blaze of strength. Without that showdown, his deteriorating body might have broken down entirely within a few years. "If Whitebeard falls, what will you do then?" Rayleigh murmured, staring at the wine bottle as if it held the answer. Nithin met his gaze without hesitation. "I'll take over his territories." He let that sink in. "The moment he dies, every island under his protection will be vulnerable to pirates and dark forces, but I've already planted several task forces, ready to move the second he goes down. We'll secure every stronghold, and the sea will be ours." Rayleigh stood there, dazed, watching the younger man summon such calculated ambition. Nithin leaned back in his chair, the lantern light flickering over the polished decks of his flagship. Once he and Roger had swept these seas, fighting titanic battles against Whitebeard and the Golden Lion. They'd scored victories, wounded their foes, but they had never been able to crush them completely. Now, though, everything had changed. Today, Nithin was undisputedly the strongest man on the ocean, and the Ghost Hand pirates the fiercest crew to sail it. Even if Whitebeard and the red-haired pirates joined forces, they wouldn't withstand Nethin's next onslaught. They'd fall in battle, leaving only ruin in their wake. No power alive could stop him in the days to come. This was the future being forged. He shook his head, a lazy smile playing on his lips. "History's full of mountains no one can climb," he said quietly. "For 800 years, the world government has sat on the highest peak. but peaks exist to be conquered. Lei Li, seated across from him, let out a soft chuckle and raised his own cup. They won't remain on that throne forever, he agreed. We all worry about the truth behind Ohara's fall. Someday it will come to light. But I'm no scholar. I don't care for old tales. I'm only interested in writing what comes next. Nethin took a leisurely sip of wine, his gaze drifting to the horizon. Lei Li paused, then laughed outright and drained his cup, the sound echoing across the deck. In that moment, the future felt wide open and entirely theirs to claim. Chapter 425. On the Brink of War. 9 days have passed since the Straw Hat crew burst into Impel Down. Luffy and his allies tore through the prison's defenses, fought their way past Magellan's poison traps, and even managed to free Mr. Tu Bon Clay and dozens of other inmates. Yet, when they finally reached the deepest level, they were one step too late. Port Gaz d'Ace had already been moved. No sooner had the Straw Hats retreated in frustration than Marshal D. Teach, Blackbeard, made his own assault. He swept through the corridors with brutal efficiency, forcing Magellan into a stalemated duel before rupturing Impel Down's security locks and unleashing its entire population. In the chaos, hundreds of criminals flooded out into the sea, vanishing beneath the waves. Meanwhile, upstairs in the surface world, the prison hulk carrying Ace had already slipped through the ruthless currents at the Gate of Justice and past the mighty knock-up stream. Now it drifted toward the very heart of the Marines, Mary Geoise itself. Lieutenant Nethin stood at rigid attention on the viewing platform. Before him lay the grand plaza of the Holy Land of Marijois. White marble spires soaring into the sky, statues of the Gorosei looming over every courtyard, and the assembled banners of the Marine admirals snapping in the wind. Below, a fleet of sleek escort ships formed a protective cordon. Around him, officers, from fleet admirals to lowly cadets, held their sabers at their sides. Not a single smile cracked their faces. On the highest balconies, 4 Marine admirals surveyed the harbor without a word. Behind them, the 5 elders watched over the scene like sentinels of fate. Nethin's heart pounded. He had trained all his life for this moment, but nothing in his service school could prepare him for the tension crackling through the air. Every cannon, every volley of rifle fire, every palm-sized den mushi poised for orders. The Marine headquarters bristled with readiness for all-out war. Above the harbor, the prison ship loomed like a chained monster, its rusted iron hull streaked with black soot. On its deck, armored officers paced, awaiting the arrival of their most infamous prisoner. "Sir," Nethin whispered to his superior, Captain Silvers, "the vessel's coming into docking range." Captain Silvers nodded, his jaw set. "All right, maintain full alert. If there's the slightest disturbance, do you hear me?" Nethin swallowed. "Yes, sir." At that instant, a thunderous roar echoed across the plaza. Cannons thundered into life, volleys of shots, not toward the prison hulk, but across the water. Marine ships held their fire. The shots came from the shore. On the distant shoreline of White Sea, thousands of figures lined the cliffs, rival pirate crews lighting celebratory salutes. Word of Ace's capture had spread like wildfire. They were taunting the Marines, daring them to respond. A tense hush fell. Admiral Kizaru cracked a rare smile, his golden eyes gleaming. "Well," he drawled, "they did say we wouldn't fire first." Admiral Aokiji folded his arms, frost mist curling at his sleeves. "Let them waste their powder," he murmured. But Admiral Akainu's expression was already stormy red. He lifted his gaze, turning toward the plaza. "This is a challenge. We cannot ignore it." A single nod from the 5 elders crystallized the decision. From every quarter of the Holy Land, drums of war sounded. The Marines squared their shoulders, braced their rifles, and gripped their sabers with white-knuckled determination. Lieutenant Nethin felt an electric surge of adrenaline. His orders were clear: protect the prisoner at all costs, uphold the Emperor's decree, and be ready to strike back. As the massive gates of Marijois swung open, revealing hundreds of soldiers and officers mobilizing, Nethin raised his saber. The hush broke into a roar of "Oorah" that echoed through the marble canyons. This was no longer mere prisoner transport. It was the opening salvo on the brink of open war. And Lieutenant Nethin, heart-hammering, was standing right at its center. The sun had barely risen over Justice Square when Admiral Duran's voice thundered across the assembled ranks of 100,000 elite Navy troops. Listen up. In just 3 hours, one of the world's three great pirate legends, Whitebeard, Edward Newgate himself, will arrive on our doorstep. You cannot afford to let your guard down for a single moment. Prepare yourselves. Before the Navy headquarters, grand facade, stood the 7 warlords of the sea, each a Kiwi-high appointed by the 5 elder stars. At the center were the feared duo, Hawkeye Mihawk, the world's greatest swordsman, and the towering Bartholomew Kuma. Flanking them were the newer warlords, pirates who had only recently risen to infamy. Among this legendary assembly was Nethan, once a notorious bounty hunter, known for bringing in pirates with rewards topping hundreds of millions of berries. Having earned his title the hard way, he now served under the world government, sworn to uphold justice even against the mightiest foes. "If Whitebeard has any sense left," remarked Boa Marigold with a cold smile, "he'll stay home with his old bones. But we all know that's not going to happen. A man like him dies best on the battlefield." A murmur of agreement rippled through the warlords and admirals alike. They all understood. For Whitebeard, old age was no excuse. When he arrived, he'd be coming to fight, and this day would decide all their fates. Early on, 3 chairs had been set up beneath the execution platform. Now the admirals, Akainu, Kizaru, and Aokiji, emerged from the Navy headquarters one by one. Clad in their cloaks of justice, they strode to the stage and took their seats in solemn silence. Their presence alone was enough to reinforce the Navy's iron grip. 3 of its most fearsome warriors, like immovable mountain peaks, standing guard for the thousands of Marines below. After a tense wait, Fire Fist Ace was brought forward in shackles and handcuffs, led up the ramp to the platform. Moments later, Admiral Sengoku and the legendary hero Garp appeared at the top of the stairs. Sengoku paused beside Garp and said quietly, "I'll handle the announcement from here. Please step back down." Garp, his jaw set, nodded once. Sengoku took his place at the podium, while Garp climbed down and joined Chief of Staff Crane just off stage. Crane laid a steady hand on Garp's shoulder and murmured, "It's not your fault." Silence fell over the assembled Marines as Sengoku raised his voice, preparing to speak for the entire Navy. Crane shot a quick glance at the silent Garp. Garp masked his emotions behind a booming laugh. "Relax, lad," he teased. "She's harmless at a time like this." On the execution platform, Ace's ears picked up Garp's voice. He cracked open his eyes and looked up, the turmoil in his gaze impossible to hide. "Speak up, Ace. Say your father's name." Admiral Jean Guo's voice boomed through the megaphone as he strode onto the platform. Ace closed his eyes, steeling himself. "My father is Whitebeard." "Wrong," Fleet Admiral Warlord States cut in, his tone icy. "Your mother was Portgas D. Lugiu. Before she died, she carried the child of another man, a man once labeled the world's greatest criminal. He was the pirate known as the King of the Pirates." Sengoku's face grew grave. He stepped forward, lifting the megaphone high for all to hear. "That's right. Your true father is none other than Gol D. Roger, the Pirate King." A stunned hush fell over the onlookers. Even on remote islands like Chambord and countless others, people clutching Den Den Mushi and video phones froze in shock as the revelation spread. The blood of the Pirate King still runs in the world. Mihawk cast a sidelong glance at the execution platform. The announcement had caught even him off guard. After all, he'd been in Logatown the day Roger was sentenced, one of the very few who witnessed the moment that launched the great pirate era. Beside him, Ace's jaw tightened and his fists curled. He refused to accept the life report the world government had just broadcast. Whitebear, D, and Whitebeard alone was the father he recognized. No sooner had Ace ground his teeth than a murmur rippled through the assembled crowd. Whispers swelled into frantic chatter until a rear admiral came sprinting up to the dais. "Fleet Admiral, there's an emergency report. Without any orders, the gates of justice have opened, and we've lost all contact with the power control room." "What?" The Fleet Admiral's face drained of color. He whirled and gazed out toward the sea. Through the morning mist, the shadowy forms of dozens of ships were emerging, each hull and sail unmistakably those of pirate vessels. If you count carefully, there are 30, maybe 40 ships closing in on the harbor. Are they preparing to attack? Wait, I still haven't spotted Whitebeard's flagship. Officers on the Navy's fortress walls glanced anxiously at one another, straining their eyes for any sign of the legendary pirate. Just then, the water inside the harbor's breakwater began to churn violently. A vast, shadowed shape moved beneath the surface, and dozens of foaming bubbles burst upward like geysers. High above it all, at the very pinnacle of Navy headquarters, Nethan sat cross-legged on a narrow ledge. No one had noticed him arrive, nor would they have detected his presence, for the air around him warped strangely, scrambling any conventional surveillance or scrying techniques. He looked down at the rising froth, and with a faint, almost regretful sigh, shook his head. Under the stunned, disbelieving gazes of Navy sailors and pirate spotters alike, the great hull of the Moby Dick broke through the waves. Its timbers glistened with soapy bubbles that cascaded down the sides as it steamed toward the quay. At the prow stood a lone figure in a dark cloak, gripping a long naginata. He strode forward with deliberate calm. At each footfall, the naginata's blade tip tapped against the wooden deck, producing a crisp, metallic ring that echoed across the water. There was no panic in his movements, only an eerie, unshakable order. Silence fell over the harbor as everyone realized Whitebeard's fleet had arrived in force, and its master had come ashore in terrifying, controlled precision. Edward Newgate, better known as Whitebeard, strode onto the deck, his immense torso bared to the sky. Though age had marked his body with countless scars and lines, the sheer force of his presence sent a chill through every sailor assembled. His legendary white mustache bristled like a banner in the wind. With Whitebeard's arrival, the long-anticipated clash at the summit had finally begun. Chapter 426, Whitebeard tensed his massive arms. Despite his years, his muscles bulged beneath weathered skin, and with a sudden hammer-like motion he swung them outward. The shockwave from his tremor fruit rent the very air into jagged mirror-like cracks, spidering out in every direction. Bound to the execution platform, Portgas D. Ace's heart pounded. He ground his teeth and called out, "Father, why are you here? I brought this on myself. I acted without orders." He knew the Navy hadn't assembled such a force merely to execute him. They intended to crush the Whitebeard pirates once and for all. Yet Vice Admiral Garp had warned him Edward Newgate would come. With the 2nd Division's captain already publicly beheaded, Whitebeard, who had held sway over these seas for more than 10 years, following Roger and preceding Nethan, would never stand aside. The old pirate's gaze swept over the Marines, his presence as commanding as a king's. Then, in a voice that rolled through the ranks like distant thunder, he spoke with calm authority. "No, release him." At that single command, every Marine froze. The air itself seemed to obey Whitebeard's will, and Portgas D. Ace felt hope surge in his chest once more. Marco and the others crossed their arms and nodded grimly. "Yeah, we heard everything. You've been through hell, Ace," Marco said. "This all started because Blackbeard murdered Sage, captain of the 4th Squad. Ace went to sea to avenge him. You might call it reckless, but if it were us, we'd do the same." A roar rose from the assembled pirates. "Hold on, Ace. We're coming for you. Navy headquarters. Prepare to die." Defiant grins spread across their faces as they squared off against the imposing fortress. Beneath the execution platform, Chichi Chigo and Huang Yuan sat in perfect stillness. Their calm exteriors belied the storm of power coiling around them like a living thing. At a barely perceptible signal, a squad of unruly prisoners was dragged forward and chained into place. No sooner had the last bolt clicked home than the ground began to shudder. At first, it was a tremor. In the next moment, a full-scale quake. Panicked cries echoed through the courtyard as debris rattled and dust curled into the air. Heads snapped upward, and every eye fell on the twin wings of the Navy headquarters, now shaking violently as though something colossal struggled to burst free from within. Shock and terror rippled through the crowd. Whatever was happening, it was only just beginning. A deafening roar split the air as an immense tsunami, taller than the Navy fortress itself, towered over the ramparts, its towering crest ready to swallow everything in its path. The tremors beneath the sea had to be the work of that man. Vice Admiral Garp, who'd faced Whitebeard more times than he could count, watched the wall of water advance and growled, "Edward Newgate, Whitebeard, the man who ate the quake fruit." Far across the Grand Line, millions tuned into the live broadcasts from Marine headquarters. Faces went pale as viewers witnessed the raw, unstoppable force hurtling toward the stronghold. Seasoned sailors and Marines, hardened by storms and skirmishes alike, were left speechless. "It's Whitebeard's doing. A tsunami on this scale? Unbelievable," came the murmurs. And yet, for all their shock, an even darker thought crept into their minds. If Whitebeard's power could summon a wave of this magnitude, how monstrous must Nethan be? Nethan, the phantom hand who had dethroned Whitebeard, and who, not long after, had wiped out the beast pirates, loomed now as a legend far beyond mortal reckoning. With a thunderous crash, the tsunami struck the fortress walls, sending steel girders bending and sparking. The real battle, it seemed, was only just beginning. Huge waves roared like a wrathful sky collapsing on the Navy headquarters, threatening to engulf everything in their path. At that critical moment, Admiral Ching-ji soared into the air and called forth his devil fruit power. "Ice Age," he bellowed. From his outstretched arms shot two colossal ice pillars that drove straight into the towering tsunami. In an instant, the surge froze solid and split into twin icebergs, an astonishing feat that left every onlooker slack-jawed. Even the Navy's own admirals and generals stared in awe at Ching-ji's godlike power. With the tsunami neutralized, Ching-ji pressed his advantage and launched a probing strike at Whitebeard. "Ching-ji, you impudent child," Whitebeard rumbled in amusement. Suddenly he swung a massive fist into the empty air. A crack like thunder split the atmosphere, and a shockwave blasted outward with unstoppable force. It slammed into Ching-ji midair, shattering his icy form into countless shards that rained down into the harbor. In an instant, the entire bay froze over, sealing the scene in an eerie, crystalline stillness. Silence reigned as everyone absorbed the sheer scale of what they had just witnessed. After a tense moment's pause, the Navy Lieutenant General from headquarters raised his blade and bellowed, "Open fire! Destroy the Moby Dick!" At his command, the frozen standoff shattered. Pirates aboard the ship howled as they poured onto the ice, charging full force toward the harbor. At the same time, naval officers and admirals surged forward, their war cries filling the air as swords and pistols clashed. The battle was truly joined. In the heart of the melee, just as the Navy's commanders collided with Whitebeard's men, a brilliant streak of sword energy tore across the field. Its raw power drove fighters on both sides reeling back, and the ice under the harbor cracked open as if cleaved in two. That unmistakable aura could belong to only one man, Dracul Hawkeye Mihawk, the world's greatest swordsman. Onlookers froze, eyes wide with dread, until they spotted him, tall and unflinching, black blade in hand. Across the Chambo Islands, a stunned hush fell over everyone who recognized the legend standing before them. Under the horrified stares of countless onlookers, Hawkeye's slash, an arc of crackling sword energy, swept across the courtyard. Then, with a sound like shattering steel, it came to an abrupt halt. The blade's force slammed into an unseen barrier, shot skyward, and dispersed into shimmering motes. The man who had stopped Hawkeye's attack was none other than Captain Diamond Chiaozi of the 3rd Division, standing composed where no enemy blow should have been able to touch him. Surveying the chaotic battlefield, Huang Yuan knew that to minimize further losses, they had to capture the thief first. He had barely healed from the wounds Nethan had dealt him on the Chambord Islands, and the memory still rankled. Now that war had erupted, he intended to unleash his pent-up frustration. With a bellowing roar, he transformed, his yellow ape form igniting into a brilliant, golden silhouette. He rocketed into the air, channeling his signature technique, the 8-foot Cheong Guyu cannon. A blinding beam of energy tore toward Whitebeard. Once hailed as the strongest man alive, Whitebeard was older now and no longer the fleet-footed titan he had been, but his pride remained unbowed. As Huang Yuan's beam struck, it slammed into Whitebeard's lifted arm and went nowhere, shattering into harmless sparks. Before the beam could even touch the ground, Captain Marco of the 1st Division strode forward and with effortless precision redirected the remaining energy. Huang Yuan's fury erupted in his eyes. "How dare you stand in my way?" he thundered, fists clenched as the two captains advanced to meet him. The war had only just begun, and the thief at its center still remained at large. Nethan's order rang out across the battlefield, "Seize the king at once!" No sooner had he spoken than the fearsome yellow ape lunged forward. From the crowd, Phoenix Marco, 1st Division captain of the Whitebeard Pirates, let out a fierce cry. He sprang up, intercepting the beast's blow in midair. A furious duel ensued among the clouds as Marco unleashed torrents of blue flame, each strike pushing the yellow ape farther back until it finally tumbled to the ground. Spectators stared upward in stunned silence before one dared to gasp, "That's Phoenix Marco himself. They say those blue flames can heal any wound, no matter how grave." Chapter 427. The Straw Hat appears. "Giants, keep an eye on the skies as well," the yellow ape called out as he crashed back to the ground. At his command, the Navy's giant contingent roared in response, bracing to join the battle. Diamond Joes, captain of the 3rd Company, watched the approaching ranks of naval giants and felt a pang of frustration. He remembered all too well the giants under the Ghost Hand's command. Their momentum, their ferocity, it was on a completely different level from these Navy troops. And especially their leader, the Thunder Giant Helding, a powerhouse even Jaws himself had struggled to handle, tightly allied with Marco's forces. Compared to that, this squad before him still had a long way to go. Anger flared behind Joe's eyes. Without warning, he slammed his fist into the frozen ground, shattering the ice with a thunderous crack. He tore free a gargantuan slab, as vast as an iceberg, and hurled it toward the naval giants. Standing nearby, Admiral Akinu watched the massive ice block hurtling straight at him. His expression darkened in silent fury. It wasn't the chill of the ice devil fruit that bothered Nethan. It was the sting of Joe's words. The Ghost Hand Pirates' giant corps had grown into the most fearsome fighting force in the world. Giants wielding devil fruits of thunder, decay, and metal thundered across the battlefield, unleashing devastation that gave Navy headquarters endless headaches. By comparison, the Navy's own giant division looked like child's play. It wasn't that the Marines lacked devil fruits. They simply refused to give them to giants, fearing that the enhanced strength would make them impossible to control, or worse, prompt them to revolt. The result was a half-hearted army of underpowered behemoths, a paper shield against true terror. That might have been tolerable if the Ghost Hand Pirates hadn't deployed their giants. Facing Jaws' titans, the Navy's great defenders of justice were reduced to a pitiful joke beside criminals who would stop at nothing to secure victory. Akainu had nothing left to retort to Jaws' challenge. Sullen and seething, he hid his frustration behind the lofty banner of justice and let his anger erupt. With a roar, he launched a single, colossal magma-infused punch. Boom! The searing fist tore through the massive ice barrier as though it were paper, vaporizing it in an instant. In its place, Akainu's magma shuddered and fragmented into a shower of volcanic bombs that rained down across the harbor. He didn't pause to check on his own men. All that mattered was that the firebombs struck Whitebeard's pirates. Devastation to the enemy was enough justification for anything. Boom, boom, boom. Each explosion thundered louder than the last, rattling the bay for miles around. Ordinary Marines and pirates alike screamed and scattered in terror, unable to withstand the infernal assault. Then, at the height of the chaos, Little Oz, the young giant whose appearance had already shifted the momentum of countless skirmishes, stepped forward. His very presence split the fray, forging a path for Whitebeard's forces to pour into the harbor. Even as Oz fell under Akainu's onslaught, his sacrifice opened the way, and the pirates surged in, crashing through the Navy's front lines. Yet there was no real victory in storming the bay. The moment the pirates flooded in, it became clear that the Navy had prepared this trap long ago. Their advance straight into the bay was exactly what the admirals had wanted all along. From the outset, Marine headquarters knew that if the fleet admiral and his 3 admirals joined forces with the Shichibukai under their command, any head-on assault on the harbor would be all but impossible. So they staged a token skirmish, withdrew the bulk of their fleet, and lured Whitebeard's armada into the bay. At the fleet admiral's order, a special counterattack plan was poised to spring. But before the Navy could put that plan into motion, a sudden voice rang out from above. High atop the fortress wall, Nethan, who'd been keeping watch, was he first to glance skyward. And then, with the thunderous crack of shattering ice, a massive warship plummeted from the heavens and smashed into the smoke-choked battlefield below. From the wreckage tumbled 3 figures, Jinbi of the Fishmen, the flamboyant Queen of Hormones, Emporio Ivankov, And, most astonishing of all, Monkey D. Luffy, Straw Hat firmly in place, flanked by the rest of the Straw Hat pirates. For a heartbeat, even Whitebeard and his commanders stood frozen in disbelief. Then Vice Admiral Sengoku's eyes narrowed as he spat out, "You've brought your family in again, Garp?" On the other side of the smoke and chaos, Vice Admiral Garp blinked in shock. His broad grin disappeared. "Straw Hat Luffy, you had to pick Marine headquarters for your grand entrance?" A stunned hush fell over every sailor, Marine and pirate alike. The battle, it seemed, was about to take yet another unexpected turn. Mihawk's single eye flicked toward the red-haired youth standing amid the chaos. Nethan, now bearing that straw hat and all the weight of the promise it carried. Even the world's greatest swordsman could sense the storm gathering around him. Across the battlefield, Fleet Admiral Sengoku shot Vice Admiral Garp a furious glare. Duty compelled him back to the carnage unfolding before him. He fixed his stern gaze on the towering warlord Jinbei. "Is this truly your choice, Jinbei?" he demanded. Jinbei met Sengoku's challenge without hesitation. "Yes, Admiral. I'm done being one of the Shichibukai. From this moment on, I stand here, with Nethan and the rest of you, to save Ace." At the center of the fray, Zoro crouched with a single knife in hand. His eyes were locked on the ominous execution platform looming overhead. "Oi, Nethan," he called in a low voice. "Your brother's right up there." A few paces back, Sanji lit a cigarette, inhaled slowly, and exhaled just as deliberately. Outwardly, he wore his customary nonchalance, but every drag seemed to carry the weight of the world. On this battlefield, the warlords were nothing more than pawns next to the admirals, and none loomed larger than Whitebeard himself. Zoro shoved his hands into his pockets and shot Sanji a cocky smirk. "You scared, Curly Brow?" Sanji flicked his cigarette ash, tone cool. "Me scared? Not a chance, you green-haired idiot." They were moments away from coming to blows when Nethan let out a roar that cut through the tension like a cannon blast. With one explosive burst, he knocked two Marines aside and sprinted forward. "Ace, I'm coming to save you!" "Luffy!" Zoro and Sanji shouted as their captains sprinted ahead. They surged forward to support him, only to be halted in their tracks by a sweeping blade aura that snapped through the battlefield like a black wave. Standing at the center of that deadly arc was Dracul, Hawkeye Mihawk. His cold, ebony blade shimmered as it came to rest before Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji. Watching from a short distance, Nethan's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected to face the world's greatest swordsman here, and he knew better than anyone that he stood no chance in a straight duel. Nami, too, spotted Hawkeye and froze. Tears sprang to her eyes. If the Admiral's presence hadn't been terrifying enough, now Hawkeye himself had arrived on the scene. How much suffering had driven her to this point? Hawkeye cast a sidelong glance at Nethan, but said nothing. Inwardly, he thought, "You're still far from ready, boy." Before Hawkeye could press his advantage, another figure darted forward. Foil Vesta, captain of the 5th Division of the Whitebeard Pirates. He slammed his rapier against Hawkeye's blade in a thunderous clang, forcing the world's greatest swordsman to hold his ground and buy precious seconds for the Straw Hats. Seeing his path momentarily clear, Nethan choked down his doubts and leapt back into the fray alongside Luffy. Under the protective cover of Ivankov's bizarre transformations and Jinbei's unbreakable defense, the trio burst forward as if a dam had broken, determined to carve their way through any enemy whose stay oozed between them and their goal. As Luffy and his crew stormed onto the battlefield, the very scene seemed to warp in response to their arrival. Dozens of heads turned instantly, all eyes fixated on the Straw Hat captain, as if he'd become the unchallenged focal point of the fight. Chapter 428, Whitebeard unleashes his power. The battlefield had descended into utter chaos. Luffy's small band of prisoners and the Sky Sei's Jinpei, though few in number, were proving unexpectedly effective, so much so that even the Navy's once overwhelming advantage was blunted. Somewhere in the confusion, General Zhang Guo stood atop the execution platform, phone bug pressed to his ear. He peered out at the fray, his gaze locking onto Whitebeard's massive figure in the distance. "Execute the battle plan," Zhang Guo barked, his voice echoing across the frozen harbor. No sooner had the order sounded than the Whitebeard pirates, side by side with the Straw Hat crew, surged toward the square beneath the platform. The Navy forces, reeling from the sudden onslaught, fell back from the ice-encrusted docks to the plaza itself, forming a desperate bulwark against Whitebeard's advance. From the rear lines, another threat emerged. 20 hulking figures strode into view, pacifistas, the world government's fearsome human weapons. Their metal frames gleamed in the pale light as they opened fire on the Whitebeard pirates without hesitation. Bartholomew Kuma, or at least what remained of the man beneath the machine. Marco's eyes narrowed as he watched the mechanical giants tear toward his friends. He clenched his fists, determination burning in his gaze. Whitebeard's crew would not fall so easily, and soon the full might of the world's strongest pirate would be unleashed to prove it. Whitebeard turned his gaze briefly to the rear, then snapped his orders in a low, commanding voice. "Ignore the enemies behind us. Press the attack from the front." Splitting our forces now to deal with pacifists and the scientific troops would only stall our assault on the square, and he wouldn't allow it. Just then, the captain of Whitebeard's squad pirates, the famed leader of the Great Eddie Spider Squad, stepped onto the deck of the Moby Dick. Whitebeard's booming voice carried across the planks. "Squad, are you all right? I just lost contact with you." Squad met his gaze, face streaked with sweat and grime. "I'm intact, father," he reported, though his tone was grim. "But my men, we suffered heavy casualties." He advanced another pace, each bootfall echoing ominously. Whitebeard hardly batted an eye. But lurking at the edge of the deck, Admiral Akainu and Fleet Admiral Sengoku exchanged a glance, an almost imperceptible glint in their eyes. Before anyone could react, Squad dropped all pretense. In a single, lightning-fast motion, he lunged forward and drove his blade into Whitebeard's chest. The air around them went still as the pirate lord's roar of surprise cut through the deck. Whitebeard barely even noticed Skyward approaching, and with age slowing his reflexes, he was far less ready now than he'd been 2 years ago to dodge a surprise attack in his sleep. When Skyward's blade flashed through the air, Whitebeard simply couldn't react in time. Before Admiral Sengoku, Akainu, and the others atop the naval headquarters fortress could blink in shock, Nethan quietly snapped his fingers and let a faint, amused smile cross his face. In that instant, a small stone, wrapped in a twisting aura of raw energy, shot through the air like a guided missile. It struck Skyward's sword dead center. Nethan's voice was almost a whisper as he watched the moment of impact. "He's faced me before. How dare the Navy resort to such underhanded tricks to weaken Whitebeard's strength?" Crack! The massive blade, crackling with suppressed power, fractured explosively. Steel shattered like crumbling brick, sending shards flying in every direction. Stunned silence fell across the summit as Sengoku, Akainu, and the other officers stared at the ruins of Skyward's once imposing sword, now nothing more than a scattering of steel fragments. Their eyes darted around the battlefield, trying to trace the origin of the flying stone, but in the midst of so much chaos, they simply couldn't tell where it had come from. "Skyard, what are you doing?" Marco shouted. He staggered back, still dazed by the impact, then gathered himself and launched a vicious uppercut at Skyard's jaw, sending him sprawling to the ground. Whitebeard's brow furrowed. None of the other warlords noticed anything unusual, but he had. On the very rock that had shattered Skyard's long blade, he'd seen a swirl of energy identical to his own. Could someone be wielding the same power here? He lifted his gaze, scanning the carnage for Nethan, but the boy was nowhere in sight. A fleeting thought crossed Whitebeard's mind, but he abandoned it, fixing instead on Skyard as he struggled beneath Marco's boot on the execution platform. "Why are you doing this, Skyard?" Whitebeard's voice rumbled through the din, cold and demanding. Marco slammed his heel harder into Skyard's helmet. "Answer me!" Skyard gritted his teeth against the pain. "Oh, don't play innocent, Marco," he spat. "You forced my hand. You and the Navy struck a bargain. Our lives for aces. Don't pretend you didn't." No turning back now. No hope of holding them off much longer. "They're attacking us? Impossible." Marco swore under his breath, anger and disbelief warring in his eyes. He didn't know the whole story, but he could see it plainly enough. Squard had been duped by the Navy. Thank goodness nobody saw who'd just saved Whitebeard's life. If the world knew the Admiral had been stabbed by his own son, the fallout would be unimaginable. "Betrayal, you say?" Whitebeard growled as he faced Sengoku. He planted the butt of his naginata into the deck of the Moby Dick and unleashed 2 thunderous punches into the air. The shock waves tore through the twin icebergs Aokiji had formed, shattering them into a spray of jagged ice. In an instant, a clear path swung open for every pirate under his flag, proof that the so-called mutiny was nothing but a lie. A pirate chooses his own destiny. Believe in what you will. With a roar that shook the rigging, he bellowed, "If you fear no death, then follow me." In one fierce bound, he leapt from the deck, naginata raised, and plunged into the heart of the battle. Watching that charge unfold, Zhangguo could only mutter, "He's unstoppable." Their entire plan had backfired. Instead of stopping him, they'd only provoked Whitebeard, igniting a blind, furious rage and handing the enemy an enormous assist. Boom, boom, boom. As Whitebeard strode onto the field, power crackled around him. He wasn't as strong as he'd been when he'd faced Nethin years ago, but that only made his current wrath more terrifying, an unstoppable force in this frozen wasteland. Each time he braced himself, a shockwave thundered outward, shattering the ice and decking the plaza in rubble. Hundreds of Marines flew through the air like ragdolls. Admiral Akainu watched the devastation with clenched fists. He slammed his magma-infused punch toward Whitebeard's chest. "Keep this up," he snarled, "and you'll level the entire island." "Is that a challenge?" Whitebeard bellowed, a grin splitting his weathered face. He curled his massive fingers into a fist, drawing raw, white-hot shock energy around it. Then, with a war cry that rattled nearby cliffs, he brought his gauntleted knuckles crashing into Akainu's magma blast. Boom! Fire met thunder in an earth-shaking collision, and neither side was willing to yield. Although Whitebeard's body had grown older, and his strength was no longer what it had been when he dueled Nethin, he bore no stab wounds or hidden injuries, and in a straight-up brawl he remained utterly fearsome. The instant his fist met Akainu's magma-seared punch, columns of molten rock exploded and shattered around them. Akainu's shockwave carried the upper hand, smashing into Whitebeard's chest and sending him skidding backward across the deck. Seeing their advantage slip away, Admiral Aokiji roared, "Ice Ball!" A frozen sphere enveloped Whitebeard, encasing him in a sudden blizzard. For a moment it seemed the old pirate lord was trapped. Then, with a deafening crack, the ice burst apart from within. Whitebeard gripped his naginata in both hands and swung in a single devastating arc. The air itself split like glass, and the shockwave tore through Aokiji's icy form, shattering him into fragments that flew like shards of crystal. From a distance, Admiral Kizaru, the so-called Yellow Monkey, cursed under his breath. He could not stand aside any longer. In the flash of a thought, he sprang forward, materializing before Whitebeard. Light coalesced at his fingertips, and he unleashed 3 blinding laser beams at the pirate's broad chest. The battle on the deck of Marineford had reached its fiercest moment yet. 2 admirals and an emperor locked in a cataclysmic clash of magma, ice, and light. Clang! Whitebeard's armament hockey flared to life. Even before any hidden wound could slow him, he'd already keyed into the Yellow Ape's lightning-fast strike. Curling his right arm, he coated it in hockey and met the blow squarely against his chest. The impact rattled through his bones, but he stood firm. With a roar, Whitebeard followed up with a crushing punch. Caught off guard, the Yellow Ape vaporized into a flash of golden light and slipped away. His devil fruit powers simply couldn't match Whitebeard's raw strength and reach in a head-to-head clash. One by one, the Navy's 3 admirals lunged forward to challenge him, only to be driven back by the sheer force of Whitebeard's assault. The battlefield trembled under the might of the world's strongest man, and everyone who witnessed it felt a chill run down their spine. Chapter 429. Ace rescued Aokiji's Ice Age roared to life, the swirling green mist coalescing into a massive, jagged frost giant that surged toward Whitebeard. Although the admiral still smarted from their last encounter, his pride and his devil fruit power wouldn't let him be outdone so easily. He slammed a column of ice at the pirate emperor, determined to freeze him in his tracks. At the same moment, Akainu's magma fists erupted, scorching the deck as he bore down on Whitebeard from the opposite side. Kizaru, the Yellow Monkey, hung back at a safe distance and unleashed volley after volley of deadly laser beams. Whitebeard's allied captains, however, were no bystanders. The air thundered with clashing hockey and the roar of devil fruit powers. far too much for the pirate emperor to handle alone. "Go down, Akainu!" Marco shrieked, his phoenix wings igniting in brilliant blue fire. He dove from above and delivered a thunderous kick to the Marine Admiral, scattering molten rock across the deck. Marco's eyes blazed with fury. It had been Akainu's deceit that tricked Squard into nearly driving his sword through Whitebeard himself. At the same time, Jozu the Diamond Warrior charged Aokiji like an unstoppable battering ram. His body transformed into gleaming diamond steel, and he crashed headlong into the ice behemoth, shattering it and forcing the Frost Admiral to withdraw his attack. Seeing his comrades under siege, Kizaru found himself beset by half a dozen Whitebeard captains, each pressing in to neutralize the Admiral's laser onslaught. As sparks and fragments of hockey-rimmed light danced across the deck, the balance of the battle shifted. The Navy's 3 admirals were powerful, but against Whitebeard's most loyal and formidable commanders, victory would not come so easily. Nethan watched from a rocky outcrop as the Whitebeard pirates made their move. The top 5 captains advanced in unison, each as formidable as one of the 3 disasters or a high-ranking general. Even those below that inner circle carried bounties exceeding 450 million berries. You might not topple a general outright, but you certainly wouldn't be cut down in an instant. Then Whitebeard himself stepped onto the battlefield. With a single earth-shaking roar, he charged toward the execution platform. His presence alone sent shockwaves through every onlooker. Murmurs rose like a tide. This truly is the Whitebeard pirates, unquestionably fearsome. In the crowd, some remembered the legend of Nethan and the Ghost Hand pirates, the only crew ever whispered to have bested Whitebeard. Those rumors had always seemed impossible, but watching Whitebeard's unstoppable charge, even the skeptics found themselves wondering. Standing nearby, Vice Admiral John Guo's brow furrowed at the sight. Beside him, Commodore Garp maintained a stern silence. John Guo straightened his jacket and rolled up his sleeves. "We can't just stand by and watch," he said, voice low but urgent. "Garp, it's time we stepped in." Admiral Garp sat unmoving, head bowed, as though the battle raging below had nothing to do with him. The Shichibukai exchanged uneasy glances. Whitebeard was unleashing his full might, and with Garp still motionless, there was nothing standing between Luffy's crew and the execution platform. Seizing their chance, Luffy and his friends tore across the battlefield at top speed, reaching the foot of the platform in an instant. "Ace!" Luffy shouted, eyes blazing. At his command, Lightning, the fierce subordinate of Ivankov, materialized a spiraling staircase of pulsating energy leading straight up to the dais. Fleet Admiral Sengoku's jaw tightened as he watched Luffy climb. He clenched his fists, ready to stop him, but before he could move, Garp raised his head. In a single, explosive motion, the legendary admiral lunged forward, massive form charging into the fray. Sengoku exhaled in relief. Garp was finally intervening, yet his heart sank at the thought of the bond between Garp and Luffy. He silently begged the old hero not to let sentiment cloud his judgment. Still, there was no denying Garp's unmatched prowess. This was the same man who, in a bygone era before the Great Pirate Age, had joined forces with the pirate crew known as Rocks to take on Kaido and Big Mom themselves. Now, as Garp barreled toward the execution platform, Sengoku could only watch and hope that his friend's legendary strength would be enough to rescue Ace. Nethan watched from the summit of the Navy headquarters fortress as the chaos unfolded below. Officially, Roger was nearly half a generation younger than Garp, yet here was Garp himself, determined to stop his own grandson. Apart from Whitebeard, no one, not even the formidable Marco, had ever managed to reach this execution platform. But Luffy was different. He was Garp's flesh and blood. Garp ground his teeth and charged, but Luffy was too quick. With a single, well-placed punch, he sent the admiral crashing down to the bottom of the scaffold. Nethan shook his head. "Why bother?" he muttered, settling back into the shadow of the fortress wall. As Garp lay stunned, Luffy sprang forward, and capitalizing on a rare lapse by Fleet Admiral Sengoku, shattered the sea stone chains locking Ace in place. The crack of breaking stone rang out like a trumpet blast. "That's my brother!" Luffy shouted. Below, Zoro, Sanji, and the rest of the Straw Hat crew broke into relieved grins at the sight of Ace's freedom. But amid their cheers, no one noticed Nami pressed against the cold stone at the fortress entrance. Several senior Navy officers, captains and commodores alike, had her surrounded, swords drawn. Her face went white as she realized she was cut off from the others. She opened her mouth to cry out, but gleaming blades dropped in unison, aiming to silence her forever. Nethin watched her advance. She was strong, but no match for the Rear Admiral on this mission. Even as she fought back with everything she had, a single strike cut her efforts short. Her weather staff, an instrument capable of stretching or shrinking at will, of summoning thunderclouds and rain, was knocked from her grasp. Then, at the critical moment, a hand burst through a rippling void beside her, seized her shoulder, and yanked her away. In one heartbeat, she vanished from the battlefield. The nearby admirals and captains who had rushed forward froze, bewildered. "She's gone. What just happened? What kind of ability was that?" they whispered among themselves. All the while, Lieutenant General Aokiji and the others remained entirely focused on Fire Fist Ace and Straw Hat Luffy. They hadn't noticed the sudden disappearance. High atop the Marine Headquarters fortress roof, the distortion hovered like a warped mirror. Nethin reached through the shimmering portal, closed his fingers around something solid, and pulled. In the next instant, Nami tumbled out of the rift and landed at his feet. Nami's scream cut through the night air, sharp, panicked. She clenched her eyes shut, arms flailing as if trying to ward off some unseen terror. "Hey, enough of that!" a calm voice called. Nami froze. A firm hand lifted her chin, gently forcing her to open her eyes. Blinking rapidly, she took in her surroundings. They were perched on a rocky ledge high above a raging battlefield. Below them, the Straw Hat crew fought desperately. Luffy, having just freed Ace, was sprinting past Aokiji's icy assaults, Usopp and Chopper dodging cannon fire, and Zoro's blades flashing in the chaos. Beside her, a solitary figure sat cross-legged on the edge of the cliff, back to the carnage. He wore a dark cloak that billowed in the wind, his arms wrapped around his knees. Nami recognized him instantly. "Nethin," she breathed. Relief washed over her. He had saved her again. Yet she felt a flicker of irritation, too. "Where are we?" Nethin tilted his head but didn't turn around. His voice was almost bored. "Just high enough to watch the fun. You're brave to wander into a war zone." She frowned. Yes, she was grateful. He'd pulled her out of harm's way the moment the giant sea monster had crashed down. But she still didn't trust his inscrutable calm. "You dragged me here. At least tell me why." He finally looked at her, cool gray eyes catching the moonlight. "Consider it repayment for the debt I settled for you back on Drum Island. You owe me one. Finish hiding out in Wano for a while. Think of it as even." Nami's jaw dropped. "You can't be serious. You can't just call in a favor like that." Nethin shrugged. "It's all settled. You go to Wano, lie low, and that cancel trades any more obligations between us. Simple." She crossed her arms, her temper flaring now that the initial shock was fading. "I don't work like that. You don't get to decide my debts or my fate, especially not after saving me without even asking." He raised an eyebrow. "Fair enough. But if you won't go, don't complain when the Navy picks you up. I'm done playing guardian angel." With that, Nethin folded his cloak around him and stood, as if to leave. Nami stared at him, torn between frustration and gratitude. Below, the battle raged on. Somewhere in that chaos, her friends fought for their lives, and she had her own path to choose. For the first time that night, she stood her ground. "If you want to leave, go ahead," she said, voice steady. "But I'm not running away. Not for you, not for anyone." Nethin paused, studying her. Then, with a curt nod, he turned and disappeared into the darkness. Nami exhaled. The wind at her back felt colder now, but her resolve burned brighter than ever. It was her turn to choose her destiny. Debt or no debt, cloak or no cloak. She would carve out her own way, and nothing, no favor, no repayment, would stop her. Nethin cocked his head, regarding her coolly. "You're backing out on your word," she snapped. He shrugged as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "True enough, so what would you have me do this time?" She faltered. He rubbed his chin, pondering. I suppose sending you back onto the battlefield would make things even." Without warning, he reached out and caught her by the arm. Nami's eyes widened. She jerked backward, feigning indignation. "Really, Nethin? A grown man like you, fussing over every little thing?" He merely smiled and waved her over. "Come here, sit with me and watch." She hesitated, then sighed, reluctantly stepping forward. Once at his side, she offered him a hand to help her up, but he didn't take it. Instead, he folded his legs and settled down, gazing at the fray below. The clash, led by Whitebeard, was nearing its climax. Nethan stared at the battlefield, his eyes flickering as he muttered something under his breath. Whatever was on his mind, no one could tell. Chapter 430 Falling Down. Nethan and Nami crouch atop a fractured rooftop, the acrid smoke from the battlefield curling around them. Below, the clash of fire and magma is dying down. Ace has been rescued, and the Marines are beginning to pull back. Is it over? Nami asks, brushing soot from her hands. Ace is safe. Shouldn't we retreat before they regroup? Nethan shakes his head, eyes fixed on the distance where embers still glow. No, he says quietly. This isn't enough. He pauses, voice low but firm. Even Whitebeard can only hold them at bay right now, not shatter their lines. His body's breaking down faster than we thought. Age is catching up to him. Maybe he has a year, 2 at most. And once Whitebeard falls, his crew is nothing but a name. Nami's face darkens. Then what do? We push them back harder, Nethan answers. We can't simply flee and hope someone else turns the tide. Far below, Admiral Akainu stalks across the shattered earth, magma seething at his fists. His eyes burn with righteous fury as he zeroes in on 2 familiar figures retreating into the wreckage. Ace stumbles, flames sputtering along his arms, and Luffy steadies him. For a fleeting moment, Ace stands tall, his scars gleaming in the dim light, determined to buy his brother time. He was once an admiral's equal, just like the 3 plague generals. But first came Blackbeard's betrayal, then the tortures of Impel Down. Each blow stripped away his strength until he could hardly stand. Akainu snarls, advancing without mercy. Ace summons the last of his power, erecting a wall of fire. You won't take him, he roars. Magma and flame collide in a thunderous explosion. Ace's barrier buckles. He sinks to one knee under the sheer force. Luffy lunges forward, but a single swing from Akainu sends him skidding backward. Nethan's heart clenches. He throws a hand to his forehead and cries out across the battlefield. Ace! The shout echoes against the smoke and ruin, a promise that he will not abandon his friend. Not now, not ever. Seeing Ace take blow after blow, Luffy's cry caught in his throat. He tried to rise, to rush forward, but his body collapsed to one knee, refusing to obey. Ivankov's endless hormone injections had already pushed him past his limit. He just didn't realize it yet. Akainu's cold voice cut through the roar of battle. Roger the Pirate King and the Son of Dragon, leader of the Revolutionary Army. They're brothers? His eyes glittered with contempt as they swung to Luffy. That bloodline alone is high treason. No matter the excuse, neither of you can be set free. He scarcely glanced back at Ace. Wounding him doesn't guarantee you can finish him off quickly. On this battlefield, everything changes in an instant. Prolonged fighting is pointless. With a single, fluid step, Akainu was suddenly standing before Luffy. Luffy! Ace screamed, spinning around in horror, but before he could move another inch, 2 silhouettes darted in from either side. Zoro and Sanji had sensed the danger immediately. Without hesitation, they lunged to intercept Akainu's path, determined to protect their captain at all costs. Sanji barely had time to close the distance before Akainu's molten fist came crashing down. Swearing under his breath, he lunged forward and drove his heel into Luffy's shoulder, hurling him clear of the eruption. The magma fist slammed into Sauron's blade. The searing heat swallowed the sword instantly, reducing the metal to slag. No, Zoro spat, stumbling back. He wasn't crying over a ruined sword. He was furious, but there was no time to mourn. Sanji, get Luffy out of here! Akainu's lip curled at the failed strike, and he lashed out, aiming a brutal punch at Zoro. Before the blow could land, 2 thunderous shouts rang out, from Ace on the left, Jinbei on the right. Fire Fist! Ace roared, igniting his arm in blazing flames. 3,000 Wajang Fist! Jinbei bellowed, summoning tidal power in his punch. Their attacks struck Akainu simultaneously, and with a roar of rage, the Admiral was blasted backward, the rubble. He skidded across the ground, leaving a trail of molten stone in his wake. Akainu sprang to his feet, eyes blazing with hatred. He whirled toward Ace, ready to unleash another assault. But a living shadow spilled over him from above, an ominous vortex of darkness that swallowed him whole. Akainu's instincts screamed that something was very wrong. He'd been so focused on subduing Ace and Luffy that he'd completely overlooked Whitebeard's approach. Before he could react, Whitebeard's cold gaze locked onto him, and then the old Pirate King's fist crashed into his chest. On the battlefield, there was no room for justification, only survival. Akainu had pressed his attack on a temporarily immobilized Luffy, exposing his aggression, and now karma had come knocking. Bones cracked as Whitebeard's blow sent Akainu flying. The Admiral erupted into molten rock, scrabbling backward across the deck, coughing blood at the corner of his mouth. Despite the staggering force of that strike, Whitebeard knew Akainu was still a powerful adversary, and far from finished. The Admiral's magma-hardened body began to reform, and he lunged back with a roar. Red eyes met red eyes as both warriors braced for the next exchange. Whitebeard had come to the Navy headquarters with no intention of walking away alive. Ignoring Akainu's fiery counterattack, he twisted on his heel and delivered a crushing backhand to the Admiral's head. Boom! The shockwave rippled outward, shaking the very arena of battle. Both fighters stood their ground, wounds and pride alike fueling their unrelenting rivalry. Whitebeard's chest heaved as Akainu's fist drove into him, yet in that same instant, Whitebeard's blow caught the Admiral squarely on the head. Akainu's vision blurred, as though a vat of five-flavor vinegar had been upended inside his skull, and he reeled backward, staggering to his knees. Father, Admiral Red Dog! Both the Whitebeard pirates and the Navy ranks cried out in shock. Whitebeard reeled from the magma strike, but Akainu was clearly worse off. His body shook, and he could barely stay upright. Steadying himself 2 steps back, Whitebeard seemed whole again. The crater in his chest, scorched by magma, had vanished without a trace, leaving him as imposing as ever. I told you, you lava-brained brat, he rumbled, voice rolling like distant thunder. You're only fit for lighting birthday candles. With that, he braced his feet, gripped his naginata, and delivered a sweeping, earth-shaking slash toward Akainu. The Admiral, head still spinning, fought to push himself up, but he was too slow. As Whitebeard's blade descended, a desperate shout pierced the air. Stop, Whitebeard! Sengoku's eyes narrowed as he watched the battle turning against his men. He could no longer hold back. With a bellow that shook the air, the Fleet Admiral activated his Devil Fruit power. His body swelled into the towering form of a golden Buddha, and he thrust his massive palm forward. A shockwave burst from his hand, hurtling straight toward Whitebeard. Standing his ground in the ruined plaza, Whitebeard planted his feet and braced his Bicento. The tidal force from Sengoku's strike smashed into the weapon's wickedly curved blade, unleashing a deafening roar that cracked stone and rattled the very foundations of the square. Dust and debris swept across the deck of the pirate flagship. Marco, fall back with the others, Whitebeard roared. In an instant, the Phoenix morphing first mate spread his crimson wings and shepherded the retreating pirates out of harm's way. But Whitebeard himself did not budge. He understood that the Whitebeard pirates could not make a clean break without someone holding the Navy at bay, and only he possessed the strength to do it. Sengoku wasted no time. Don't let a single pirate slip through, he barked, rallying his officers and admirals as they charged. Ace was already safe. If the remainder of the crew escaped now, then, even if they managed to fell Whitebeard, Sengoku's victory would be empty. Striding forward in his Buddha form, the Admiral laughed, voice booming across the battlefield. Very well, Edward Newgate. Then the opponent before you is only me. Whitebeard's thunderous laugh echoed across the plaza as he hefted his naginata and swung it at Admiral Sengoku. The blade's aftershock rippled outward, striking the Navy headquarters courtyard with such ferocity that the stone paving cracked and splintered in every direction. Even the massive fortress walls behind them trembled, as though they might collapse under the force. A terrified scream tore from Nami's lips when the ground bucked beneath her feet. She lost her balance, flailed in midair, and pitched sideways, right onto the young man seated cross-legged a few steps away. With a soft thud, Nami landed across him, her long legs shooting straight up like twin pillars. Skirt billowing, she lay draped over his lap. Nethan's eyes widened. He glanced down, and for a split second caught a glimpse of something so unexpectedly blinding, he almost blinked. He quickly shifted, heart pounding, as Nami scrambled to her feet, cheeks flaming. Behind them, the plaza lay in ruins, cracked stone and dust swirling in the air, while the battle between Whitebeard and Sengoku raged on. Chapter 431. It's time. Nethan crouched on the hidden ledge, his spatial distortion cloak rippling around him. Thanks to the warped field, no one below could see the two of them observing the battlefield. Perched on his back, Nami twisted free and dropped lightly onto the stone edge beside him. She folded her arms, eyes narrowed as she studied the titanic clash unfolding beneath them, Sengoku's devilish blasts pounding against Whitebeard's quaking earthshake. Ow! Nethan rubbed his skull. Your elbow just bounced off my head, and you didn't even apologize. Nami glanced over with a pained frown. A sharp ache throbbed where she'd struck him, and she was pretty sure a bruise was already blooming. She opened her mouth to point out that it's dangerous to headbutt ghosts, of all things, but a deafening roar cut her off. The shockwave from Sengoku's latest attack rocked Marineford so violently that the entire fortress shuddered. Nami staggered, her arms flailing for balance. Before she could regain her footing, the ledge crumbled beneath her. No, Nethan shouted, lunging forward, but it was too late. Nami pitched backward, plummeting toward the courtyard below. Her scream tore through the chaos, echoing against splintering stone. Then, at the last possible moment, a strong hand snatched her ankle and yanked her back. She dangled upside down, heart pounding, as Nethan scrambled over to haul her to safety. I've got you, he said, bracing his feet against the wall. He hauled her up onto the ledge, pulling her into a firm embrace. Nami's breath came in ragged gasps. She glared at him, both furious and relieved. You idiot! When will you learn that letting me fall isn't your best rescue plan? Nethan offered a lopsided grin, brushing dust from her sleeve. Point taken, but now's not the time for lectures. Look what's coming next. Above them, Sengoku and Whitebeard unleashed a fresh barrage of shockwaves. Sparks of energy crackled through the air, scorching the sky with blinding light. The colossal duel was entering its next devastating phase, and Nethan and Nami had to decide, stand and watch or dive into the fray. Nethan squared his shoulders. Whatever happens, we're going in. It's time. Nami cracked a determined smile. Let's go. Nethan's fingers closed around Nami's ankle just as her foot slipped over the stone ledge, yanking her back inside the battlement. One steady hand found her bare shoulder, anchoring her before she could pitch headlong into the courtyard below. Nami's heart hammered in her chest. She blinked up at him, a swirl of fear and anger catching in her throat. As she righted herself, the last thing she'd seen on the other side of the battlement rushed back. A towering, misshapen warrior flanked by half a dozen shadowy figures, lurking in the gloom beneath the Navy headquarters ramparts. They didn't look like Marines at all. Above them, Nethan leaned forward to peer over the edge. Below, a phalanx of white-bearded admirals in gleaming breastplates stood ready, rows of soldiers massed behind them. The scene was terrifying in itself, but Nethan's silent confidence made even those hardened officers seem small. Nami's voice came out in a trembling whisper. What are you going to do? Nethan straightened, his grip on her shoulder reassuringly firm. He gave her a half smile, calm, almost amused. I'm a pirate, he said. I want to see if I can bring down the Navy headquarters in one fell swoop. Nami stood frozen, tears welling in her eyes even as her cheeks remained dry. The nightmare of losing the Navy headquarters, her home and her duty, pressed down on her with overwhelming force. Next to her, Nethan's voice rang out, determined and fierce, though his words did little to ease her dread. Suddenly, the doors behind them burst open. Dozens of figures stepped into the grand hall, their silhouettes stark against the lantern glow. The Blackbeard pirates had been discovered hiding within the very walls of the Navy headquarters, and now they revealed themselves without shame. At their head strode Blackbeard, Tiki, his gravelly laugh echoing off marble pillars. Well, long time no see, admirals, he sneered, arms spread wide. What a thrill to meet you again, especially before you die. His voice dripped with sadistic delight. Behind Tiki, a ragtag host of former Whitebeard pirates, defectors he'd hunted down, and outlaws rescued from the ruins of Advanced City, formed a menacing phalanx. They'd all pledged themselves to Blackbeard's flag, and now they stood ready to ignite the greatest clash the Navy had ever seen. Admiral Sengoku's face went ashen. He'd suspected Blackbeard might strike at some remote outpost, but he'd never imagined the tyrant could infiltrate the heart of Marine headquarters itself. Clenching his fists, Sengoku stepped forward, voice low and resolute. "How did you get here, Blackbeard?" Tiki only laughed again, a cruel sound that promised carnage. "A magician never reveals his secrets, old man." He raised his arms, and behind him, the Blackbeard pirates surged forward, ready to bring the Navy's sacred halls crashing down. Whitebeard's eyes flicked from Sengoku to Teach, his face draining of color. Though his voice remained low, it rumbled with barely contained fury. Across the battlefield, the giant hollow screens trembled as stunned onlookers watched the Blackbeard pirates appear. Cries of alarm broke out as they recognized the dreadnought San Juan Wolf, the dreaded full-moon hunter Katarina Devon, and other infamous outlaws at Teach's side. Their arrival threw the Navy's pursuit into disarray. Back at Navy headquarters, tension crackled in the air. Fleet Admiral Tautu and Commodore Chafu stood side by side in their justice cloaks, while Black Arm Zephyr, the former admiral, lingered just behind them. Until this moment, his presence had gone unnoticed. Now Tautu's eyes narrowed as the truth sank in. Blackbeard himself was right in the thick of the action. Tautu's hand drifted toward the hilt of his sword, a cold light flashing in his eyes. Before he could draw, Chafu laid a steadying hand on his arm. "Hold," she whispered. "We're still in control. There's no need to reveal everything just yet." With that, the Marines braced themselves for the storm that was about to break. The Marines' strategy was simple: eliminate every possible emergency before it even starts. Even a Yonko-level threat, acting alone, couldn't hope to break through Marine headquarters' combined might. 2, or even 3, Yonko might launch a direct assault, but if Garp, Sengoku, and the admirals all took the field, those pirates would be routed in short order. And should 3 Yonko truly besiege the HQ, the world government wouldn't stand idle for long. They'd flood the battlefield with reinforcements. In other words, the Marines and the world government fear no head-on clash. Whitebeard, having set aside talk of the old warlord system, fixed Blackbeard with a cold glare. "You're the only one who wouldn't dare call us sons," he growled. "And yet you broke the only rule that can never be broken aboard this ship. You killed your own brother." Before Blackbeard could answer, Whitebeard's fist shot forward. The impact's shockwave hammered into the ground, shattering the pavement at their feet. Even Sengoku, standing well clear, was forced back 2 paces, his face grizzy watched the confrontation unfold. From a naval strategist's point of view, letting Whitebeard and Blackbeard tear each other apart is ideal. There's no reason to waste our own forces, only to have to fight both sides afterward. The purpose of war is clear: secure victory while minimizing your own losses and inflicting as many as possible on the enemy. When Marco and the others caught sight of Blackbeard, their outrage nearly cracked their calm exteriors. They wanted to rush in on the spot, but Whitebeard held up a massive hand to stop them. "Stand down," he thundered. "Marco, honor the memory of our fallen 4th Division captain. Let me finish this myself." With that, Whitebeard hurled himself at Blackbeard. Although the dark fruit is the bane of devil fruit users, it does nothing to blunt sheer physical force or indomitable spirit. In only a few exchanges, Whitebeard assessed Blackbeard's ability, then drove his Bicento into Blackbeard's chest, sending him crashing to the deck. Had Whitebeard been at his peak, he could have crushed Blackbeard outright, devil fruit or not, with nothing but raw power. But he deliberately held back. There would be time enough for a final reckoning later. For now, leaving Blackbeard alive served their greater purpose. Blackbeard didn't stand alone. Behind him swarmed legions of pirates, many carrying bounties of 400 million, some even over 500. At his signal, they surged forward, ready to lay siege to Whitebeard. High atop the naval fortress, Nithan watched the unfolding chaos. He closed his eyes for a moment, dispelling the twisted spatial barrier that had warped the air around them. Nami, standing beside him, sensed the change and turned to look at him. Nethan was preparing to escort Whitebeard out of danger, for what might be the last time. He stepped forward, drawing Nami's attention. She hesitated, about to ask what her role would be, when she heard his voice behind her. "Stay right here. Don't move, and I'll guarantee you'll make it out of Marine headquarters alive." Without waiting for her reply, he added in a casual tone, "It'd be a real waste if you died on me now. After all the times I've rescued you, who'd pay me back the interest on that favor?" Chapter 432, Qualification. Cough! Blackbeard staggered backward, a crimson arc splattering from his lips. "You damned monster," he growled, wiping the blood away. Whitebeard's blow had struck him full force, but thanks to his rock-like physique and the power of the dark fruit, he hadn't collapsed. Still, he wouldn't stand a chance in a fair fight against Whitebeard alone. The sheer ferocity of Whitebeard's onslaught defied all reason. Any ordinary pirate struck by even a fingernail of that titanic frame would have died instantly. Yet Whitebeard pressed on, unbowed. Truly, he was inhuman. "Kill him!" Blackbeard bellowed. At his command, the Blackbeard pirates, dozens of hardened buccaneers, drew their flintlocks and cutlasses. With a thunderous battle cry, they lunged forward, intent on surrounding Whitebeard and tearing him apart. But before a single shot was fired, a low, resonant hum cut through the chaos. The very air in front of Whitebeard warped, twisting into an undulating barrier. Bullets clanged harmlessly against the invisible wall, swords scraped and ricocheted as if striking solid steel. Blackbeard's triumphant sneer vanished. His crew froze in mid-charge, their eyes wide with shock and confusion. What sorcery was this? Fleet Admiral Warring States, Aokiji Kiyabusa, and the other admirals, all of them halted in mid-motion. Every head turned toward the spot where Whitebeard lay, struggling to rise. The battle itself had come to a standstill in the sudden hush. From behind the shattered execution platform, Rhodes emerged. He stepped into view with measured calm. A black cloak draped over his shoulders, his short dark hair damp with sweat, and simple wooden clogs whispering against the rubble. Not a word was spoken as he made his way across the field. Ships' cannons, roaring just moments before, fell silent. Swords and fists froze in midair. They all remembered too well what he'd endured. Rhodes had borne their worst blows, and yet here he was, walking back onto the same ground as if nothing could touch him. It was a sight none could bear. Nethan approached more slowly, his gaze locked on Rhodes. Beads of cold sweat formed on the brows of the nearby Navy officers. No one dared intervene. Instinctively, some even took a step back. Rhodes offered no display of power, no shockwave or blazing aura, but his calm presence on this battlefield felt like a forbidding, unclimbable peak. This was the weight of the world's mightiest man-made flesh. Suddenly, a low, hissing voice cut through the silence. Ghost hand. Blackbeard's glare fixed on Nethan. His lips curled into a snarl. He had never imagined Nethan would show up here, nor in such company. And yet there he was, stirring the embers of a conflict more dangerous than any before. Blackbeard's scheme had never included going up against Nethan, at least not until after he'd wrested Whitebeard's Quake fruit from its master. He'd watched Nethan battle Whitebeard back when Nethan still sailed under the Whitebeard flag, and from the deck of the Blackbeard pirates, he'd seen exactly how fearsome the young man was. Whitebeard, great as he was past his prime. Nethan burned with the unbridled power of youth. Even with the tremor fruit in his grasp, Blackbeard knew he'd need a long, cunning campaign to bring Nethan down, so a head-on fight was the last thing he wanted. Nethan ignored the Blackbeard crew entirely. He strode straight toward Whitebeard, who stood bloodied but unbowed amid the smoke and rubble of the battlefield. The younger pirate paused in front of the legendary captain, eyes cool and unwavering. "I've come to see you off, Whitebeard." Whitebeard said nothing at first. Then, in a low, gravelly voice, he managed, "Thank you for what you did earlier. If you hadn't taken that silent shot to stop Scourd's blade, I might never have reached Ace in time." He shook his head, regret shadowing his features. "I wish I could repay you, but I have nothing to offer. That I can't return this favor, it pains me." Nethan offered a faint, understanding smile. "There's no need to thank me." With that, he turned away, leaving Whitebeard to his thoughts and setting his course for whatever adventures lay ahead. Nethan smiled softly. "Your battle was the knock on the door to a new era, and I've been its greatest beneficiary." Edward Newgate, the legendary Whitebeard, felt the tension that had gripped his heart loosen at those words. He nodded, acceptance in his weary eyes. "Then I entrust you with my final strength. As for Blackbeard, that is yours to settle." With that, Nethan stepped forward. In one fluid motion, he drew the black-bladed sword Murasame from its sheath. A hush fell over the assembled pirates and marines alike as he spoke, his voice low and certain. Then, without warning, Murasame flared. A single shaft of pure light burst from the blade, diving straight into Whitebeard's chest, weaving itself through the warrior's soul. For a moment, Edward Newgate's form glowed like a fallen star. Then the light lifted him high into the sky, disintegrating his body into sparks that drifted away on the wind. In that instant, the ship rocked with the force of a world changed. The era of Whitebeard was over. A chime rang in Nethin's ear. System. Edward Newgate, Whitebeard, has been defeated. You have gained 50 talent proficiency. He closed his eyes for a heartbeat, called up the system interface, and allocated every last point to his distortion power. The readout spiked, 950. It was as close as his body could bear in its current state, a pinnacle of his strength, poised on the brink of his limit. Nethin opened his eyes and turned. On the deck below, Marshal D. Teach, Blackbeard himself, stood drenched in the aftermath of Whitebeard's fall. His lips curled into a dogged grin. Sea spray mingled with blood on the planks at his feet. And somewhere behind him, the rumble of approaching ships signaled that reinforcements were already closing in. Hands tightening on Murasame's hilt, Nethin stepped forward. The deck's wood cracked underfoot. Whatever came next, he felt ready. You were the one who challenged me for this world, Nethin said, voice echoing in the hush. Now it's time to finish what Whitebeard started. Blackbeard's grin widened, or perhaps it was a leer of defiance. All right, hero, show me what a beneficiary of history can do. Steel met steel. The future took shape in the clash of legends. Chapter 8. Alliances of Convenience. The last light of day painted the shattered deck in blood-red hues as Nethin's boots struck wood splintered by battle. In the distance, Blackbeard stood amid the wreckage of Whitebeard's flagship, his dark cloak fluttering like a storm cloud. He had spent these past hours scheming to seize Whitebeard's power for himself, but one line of Nethin's had stuck in his mind. I bear you no ill will, Ghost Hand. Those words had unsettled him, planted a seed of unexpected doubt. Blackbeard approached, his voice a low rumble. Nethin, he began, Whitebeard is gone, and the Marines are our true enemy now. You and I both want freedom from their tyranny. Why not combine forces? Together, we can crush the Navy before they regroup. Below decks on the Marine flagship, Fleet Admiral Sengoku's eyes snapped open at the messenger's hurried report. He had known the Ghost Hand pirates would return. Nethin had resurfaced at the Chambord Islands only days ago, and Marine intelligence had dispatched elite squads like the Peach Rabbit T-Dolphins to contain him. The world government and the Marines had watched the Ghost Hand crew warily, preferring their chaos to the 10,000 kingdoms or Wano's ambitions. By themselves, Nethin and his pirates posed a threat the Navy could handle. But a pact between Nethin and Blackbeard? That would be a calamity. Sengoku released a long sigh and pushed back from the command table. Reinforcements would have to move now. This alliance, if formed, might tip the scales of power irreversibly. Yet first, he would need to learn whether Nethin's words carried loyalty or if Blackbeard's offer was merely another trap, and the ever-shifting tides of pirate ambition. Far below, Nethin squared his shoulders, gazing at Blackbeard's dark silhouette. The fate of the seas hung in the balance. Would two of the world's most feared figures stand together or tear each other apart in pursuit of ultimate power? Only the coming dawn would tell. The admirals of the Navy headquarters had no idea what was coming. At dawn, they would find themselves assaulted on three fronts, by Nethin, by the remnants of Whitebeard's fleet, and by the Blackbeard pirates. The combined onslaught would uproot Cloudy Mountain itself and leave the world's greatest naval base in ashes. How does it sound, Ghost Hand? Blackbeard spread his arms wide, a cocky smile splitting his face as he turned to Nethin. Beneath his swagger, though, his heart pounded. If he didn't seize Whitebeard's corpse soon and strip it of the Tremor Fruit's power, someone else would, and he'd lose the only edge he had left. Nethin stood perfectly still, his crimson eyes unblinking. Finally, he spoke in a low, measured tone. Wiping out the Navy headquarters is a bold idea, one I can't deny would suit my purposes. Blackbeard's grin broadened, his black teeth gleaming in the flickering torchlight. Behind him, the warring states and their fellow admirals turned ashen. Victory seemed all but handed to him. But then Nethin's next words sliced through the air, freezing Blackbeard's smile mid-sneer. However, Nethin continued, voice cool and proud, Only one man out of Whitebeard's crew possesses the ruthlessness and cunning to make this plan succeed. You, the so-called traitor of Whitebeard. A deathly hush fell over the chamber. Blackbeard's eyes flickered with shock and indignation. Just moments ago, he'd believed Nethin would beg for his alliance. Yet the pirate emperor spoke as if Blackbeard were the one in need. "Join me," Nethin said without another word of encouragement. "Together, we'll crush the Navy, and then you and I will settle who claims the tremor fruit, once and for all." Silence stretched on. The room's air crackled with tension as Blackbeard struggled to control his fury and his ambition. The unlikeliest of alliances was about to be forged, and neither man would trust the other. But neither could afford to walk away. Not if they wanted to reshape the world. Chapter 433, Crushing. Blackbeard's grin froze in an instant, his confident swagger vanishing as his eyes narrowed. But only for a heartbeat. Then he threw his arms wide and laughed. "So you think you can take me? You may have snatched the title of World's Strongest from Whitebeard's grasp. But don't forget, I've grown far more powerful since then." Before he could finish, a whip-like crack split the air. Nethin swept his cloak aside, and the world seemed to twist and buckle around him. The very fabric of space quivered, air currents spiraled, reality itself warping, and then that roaring vortex snapped forward like a battering ram, hurtling straight at Blackbeard. Blackbeard snarled, claws flexing. "You're playing with forces you can't control." With a guttural roar, he unleashed the power of the darkness fruit, black tendrils of void surging out to swallow Nethin's attack. For a moment, it seemed as though Nethin's assault had met its match. But then the maw of darkness began to crack. The twisting force continued to pour in, unrelenting, bending and shredding those shadows from within. Blackbeard staggered. His grin flickered and died. "Impossible," he growled, eyes widening. He had mastered the darkness fruit well enough to nullify any devil fruit power, yet this was no ordinary power. Not only did Nethin's attack rival Whitebeard's legendary shockwave at its peak, it surpassed it. It wasn't just raw force, it was a fundamental distortion of space, a power even the darkness fruit could not fully contain. With a thunderous boom, Nethin's twisting energy burst through, throwing Blackbeard backward. The captain of the Blackbeard pirates crashed into the ground, carving a crater in the deck and spraying splinters everywhere. As dust and debris settled, Nethin stood tall, cloak swirling around him like a storm. His eyes were cold coals of determination. Across the wrecked deck, Blackbeard lay on one knee, darkness leaking from his wounds as he struggled to rise. The clash had just begun, and already, Nethin had proven that some powers are simply beyond even the blackest void. Blackbeard's face went white as the twisting shockwave caught him full in the chest and hurled him backward. His crew, seasoned cutthroats and devilishly strong fighters, instinctively sprang into action, weapons drawn, trying to stem the tide of that unseen power. But even united, they had no answer for Nethin's onslaught. The ground itself ruptured in front of him as the raw, spiraling force slammed into the heart of the Blackbeard pirates. Screams split the air, while Blackbeard and his lieutenants were flung in every direction like rag dolls. In a single devastating blow, the feared Blackbeard pirates lay broken and bleeding. The display of power left every Navy officer and pirate on the field gaping in shock. After all, Blackbeard himself was a warlord of the sea, and his crew counted among the most ruthless names in the Grand Line. Even here, at the climax of this great battle, they were supposed to be unstoppable. Yet Nethin tore through them instantly. This is the strength of the world's strongest man. He's far beyond anything they could have imagined. Atop the naval fortress, a sudden gust nearly knocked Nami off her feet. She raised her arm to shield her face, and when she lowered it again, her eyes widened in disbelief. Around her, Luffy, Zoro, and the others, having retreated to the edge of the fighting, were staring at Nethin's lone figure in the center of the battlefield, their hearts pounding with a mixture of awe and apprehension. They'd come further into the Grand Line than ever before, and only now did they begin to grasp the true terror behind the name Ghost Hand. Back in the East Blue, they'd heard rumors that Nethin was the world's strongest, but they'd never understood what that meant. On that isolated island, they'd witnessed him fell the giant Analu with a single blow, an uncharted level of power that still paled, in their minds, beside the Admiral's. But here, on this boundless warfront, Nethin's strength surged beyond any title or legend. Each movement he made reshaped the very air around him. Each strike sent shockwaves through the earth. It wasn't that his power was confined to what they'd seen before. It was that this battlefield finally demanded the full extent of it. As the wind died away, leaving a tense stillness in its wake, everyone at the fortress realized the same thing. They were witnessing a force unlike any other. And for the first time, the phrase strongest in the world felt utterly appropriate. Without a grand arena or worthy foes, true power can't be displayed, and this shattered battlefield atop the wrecked warship was the perfect stage for Rhodes's greatness. Blackbeard hacked and coughed amid the ruins, his face ashen with rage. He knew it was far too late to do anything for Whitebeard's fallen corpse. Gritting his teeth, he turned to signal his crew. It was time to retreat. But Rhodes, now Nethin, wouldn't allow it. Standing 100 meters away, Nethin's expression was unreadable. Then, in the blink of an eye, he vanished. One instant he was distant. The next, he materialized directly before Blackbeard, right fist cocked. "Dark water," Nethin roared, launching his punch. Blackbeard's eyes snapped open, a feral light burning in their depths. With a bellow, he thrust out his palm and seized Nethin's arm, channeling the full, crushing might of the dark fruit. The air shuddered as darkness surged, seeking to corrupt Nethin's distortion powers and render them inert. But the devil fruit energies clashed in a thunderous shockwave rather than one swallowing the other. Though Blackbeard's dark aura gnawed at the edges of Nethin's attack, it couldn't snuff out the warp energy that bent space around his fist. The two forces ripped the ground beneath them, showering debris in every direction. Blackbeard's lips curled into a savage grin. "Is that all you've got?" he taunted, squeezing tighter. Nethin's teeth flashed as he summoned his strength. "I'm just getting started." In that instant, the battlefield trembled, an omen that this confrontation was far from over. Nethin's expression didn't waver as he drove his fist forward. Blackbeard's dark fruit could only siphon devil fruit powers, but this wasn't a devil fruit attack. It was pure, unadulterated armament hockey, honed to its absolute limit. By now, Nethin's physique and hockey prowess rivaled even the beastly Kaido himself. Blackbeard attempted to absorb the impact, a fleeting grin of triumph flashing across his face, only to have it freeze into terror as a cataclysmic force tore through his arm. This was not devil fruit energy. It was raw, flesh-and-bone power, armored hockey at its apex. Nethin hadn't needed to spend a single talent point to amplify his final strike. Through relentless training and that climactic showdown with Kaido, he had awakened the true zenith of armament hockey. K-crack! Under Nethin's blow, Blackbeard's arm buckled as if it were splintering wood. The pirate lord was sent hurtling backward, flipping end over end across half the battlefield before crashing into the shattered remains of a collapsed tower. Dust and debris billowed up around him. "Captain!" someone shouted, rushing toward the wreckage, only to pause, breath caught in their throat at the sight of their slumped, battered leader. Nethin's crew staggered to their feet, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. They'd known Nethin was formidable, but they also knew the kind of power Blackbeard wielded. With the dark fruit's ability to nullify anyone's devil fruit, Blackbeard's followers had always trusted in his supremacy, until now. Earlier, Blackbeard tried to absorb Nethin's fruit energy, hoping to strip away his powers. But when he attacked, Nethin's raw, flesh-only strength shattered every expectation. With one blistering punch, Nethin sent Blackbeard hurtling nearly 50 meters backward, gouging a deep crater out of the deck. It wasn't finesse that did it, just unbridled force. Before Blackbeard could recover, Nethin pivoted toward the gathered pirates. He lifted his hand, and the air around them rippled with distortion. In an instant, a spiraling vortex several hundred meters wide raged to life on the ship's deck. Screams echoed as the crew tried desperately to use their devil fruit powers to break free, but the more they struggled, the tighter the whirlpool gripped them. Wood splintered and planks tore free as the vortex swallowed sailcloth and men alike. Even seasoned fighters found themselves helpless. Nethin's eyes were cold and determined. He never took his gaze off the writhing mass of pirates. The deck twisted beneath their feet, their cries growing fainter as they were drawn inexorably inward. Blackbeard, bruised and battered, staggered to his feet on the edge of the chaos. He stared in disbelief at the young man who had just humiliated him, and now held his entire crew at his mercy. The sea wind howled as Nethan's power continued to spin, and the future of Blackbeard's empire hung in the balance. Engulfed in the swirling vortex, Blackbeard's elite squad was drawn inexorably toward its heart. Within seconds, the 9 fearsome pirates, each carrying bounties as high as 450 million berries, were crushed like brittle twigs. Bones snapped, blood splattered, and flesh was torn to scraps until nothing remained but mangled fragments. Then, with a final deafening boom, the whirlwind collapsed, and all 9 lay dead in its ruin. When the dust settled, Nethan stepped forward, his silhouette emerging from the haze. He crossed half the plaza in 3 long strides and brought his boot down directly on Blackbeard's chest. The notorious pirate lord roared and unleashed the full might of his darkness fruit. An oppressive void swallowed the sky, a living black shroud wrapping around him like indomitable armor. Undeterred, Nethan channeled his armament haki in response, an aura so overwhelming it felt as if a mountain were crushing the air itself. His foot drove into the darkness barrier, and in an instant, the void tore apart like a shatterproof drum finally giving way. Jagged fragments of warped energy fell away, dissipating into cracks in the stone plaza. Silence fell once more. The ink-black veil had been shattered, the distortion of Blackbeard's power drained into the ground. Beneath Nethan's boot, the pirate lord lay pinned and defeated, his army of 9 annihilated, his dark shield broken, and the field bathed in the quiet aftermath of absolute force. Under the savage, twisting force, even Blackbeard's legendary strength couldn't save him. His body ruptured in an instant, spraying a crimson mist into the air. Snap! Snap! The dark energy tore through him and drove deep into the earth. Under the horrified stares of every onlooker, that very point became the epicenter of a catastrophe. Cracks fanned out in every direction like a spider's web, ripping through the Navy headquarters. In the few heartbeats since Rhodes's brazen shot, the entire tide of battle had reversed. The Blackbeard pirates lay annihilated, and the proud walls of the naval fortress lay in ruin. Chapter 434, Declaration of War. The Blackbeard pirates lay in ruins, and with their defeat, the massive warlord pillar toppled to the deck below. Admiral Sengoku's voice rang out over the harbor. Pursue the remnants of the Whitebeard fleet with everything you've got. Let not a single pirate slip away. His gaze locked on Nethan, formerly known as Ross, and his fist clenched in determination. Sengoku's deepest fear had been a pact between Nethan and Blackbeard. United with the Whitebeard survivors, they could have threatened Marine headquarters itself. Now, with Blackbeard shattered, that dread was momentarily lifted. Yet Nethan's strength was astonishing, nearly on par with Whitebeard at his prime, and although the battle had been decided, there was still room for a man of his power to wreak havoc. Sengoku's mind raced. He needed to secure Nethan's allegiance before the Ghost Hand pirates were crushed. If Nethan fell, no force could save his crew from utter annihilation. Only one pirate flag would remain unchallenged on the seas, the red-haired pirates. It could be said that the age of the great pirates was drawing to a close, and with it, the world government's grip and the Navy's authority had never been more secure. Even a revolutionary army twice its present strength would be powerless to reignite the seas. With the Blackbeard pirates utterly annihilated, all that remained was to mop up the last resistance. In the bullpen at Marine headquarters, officers clustered around their den mushi, watching the final battle's closing moments. Whispers rippled through the room as the image of Blackbeard gave way to a new figure. The pirate lord's arrival had been earth-shaking, but the arrival of Nethan was on another level entirely. With ruthless precision, Nethan cut Blackbeard down, ending the notorious pirate's reign in an instant. All that now stood between the Navy and total victory was a possible last-ditch alliance with the Ghost Hand pirates. If they failed to intervene, the triumph of the world government would be beyond dispute. Fire Fist Ace had been rescued, but Whitebeard himself fell on the battlefield, and the remnants of his crew bore grievous losses. In every telling, this war belonged to the Marines. The seas were theirs once more. High above the battlefield's wreckage, Nethan stood alone, the Blackbeard pirates utterly annihilated at his hands. From a distance, Marco and the other Whitebeard commanders watched him, each face a study in understanding and mixed emotion. Nearby, Ace's eyes never left Nethan's silhouette. His expression was equally conflicted. Whitebeard was gone, but Nethan had spared him the ignominy that death at Blackbeard's hands would have brought. He had also wiped the Blackbeard pirates from the seas in one decisive stroke. To the entire Whitebeard crew, such an act was a debt they could never fully repay. In their world, honor and gratitude meant everything. After this clash, few among them would dare oppose the Ghost Hand pirates again. Whispers already drifted through the ranks. Why fight an inevitable tide? This era belonged to Rhodes, and they had no power to halt its rise. Better to watch from the sidelines than resist, and perhaps, in time, choose the winning side. But one thing was certain, they could no longer remain on the sidelines. The clash for the naval headquarters raged on. Admiral Aokiji's frozen tidal wall still held the harbor in its frigid grip, trapping warships in sheets of ice and making any hasty retreat all but impossible. From the ramparts to the flooded docks, cannon fire and blood mingled in a savage dance of smoke and steel. Officers barked orders, wounded men collapsed in the streets. Even the swiftest evacuation plans had gone awry under such overwhelming pressure. Then, at the very heart of the shattered plaza, the earth itself split open. From that yawning fissure, Nethan, light as air and cloaked in midnight black, rose into view. His boots hovered inches above the cobblestones. Around him, debris drifted on a sudden, unnatural calm. Sailors and marines paused mid-step, weapons half-drawn, eyes lifted in stunned silence. Hands folded behind his back, Nethan surveyed the entire island, the smoking ramparts, the frozen sea, the lines of uniformed admirals and officers arrayed against him. The wind caught his cloak, revealing the quiet confidence in his posture. Then, in a clear, resonant voice that carried to every hidden corner of the fortress, he spoke. "From the moment you branded me a pirate, I vowed you would never forget that day. The debt you marked against my name will shape the fate of this world." His words echoed like rolling thunder. On the battlements, Sengoku's stern face tightened. Vice Admiral Karp's hand froze on his sword hilt. Even Akainu and Aokiji, two of the Navy's greatest, halted their advance, each admiral exchanging a long, measured look. All at once, the roar of battle stilled under Nethan's oath, and every eye turned to him, waiting to see just how far a pirate would go to claim his vengeance. The holoscreen crackled to life in every port, city square, and living room around the globe. A single caption hovered above the image of a lone pirate ship silhouetted against a storm-dark sea. Justice is written by the victors and enforced by the strongest. In this world, the world government holds the pen. Those they name pirates are pirates indeed. On the deck stood Nethan, once known as Ross, calmly gazing at the distant figure of Admiral Sengoku. Tall and resolute in his bronze armor, the admiral's face was a mask of grim authority. Millions watched as Sengoku's voice boomed across every channel. How can a pirate's guilt ever be expunged? Even if you were to slay the entire Blackbeard crew, you could never atone for your crimes. Nethan's lips curved into a faint, confident smile, as if he'd been waiting for exactly this challenge. He spread his arms, the wind whipping his dark coat into twin banners behind him. Below him, the naval headquarters lay like a white fortress on the water, his audience, and now his target. "So be it," Nethan replied, voice steady and clear enough for every broadcast relay to capture. "Then let the war begin here and now. I, Ghost Hand Nethan, undisputed ruler of all the world's seas, officially declare war upon your navy and the world government." With that, he raised his steel gauntlet to the stormy sky. Lightning crackled along the horizon, as if answering his summons. Every viewer felt it, the calm before a cataclysm, the moment when a pirate's defiance became a declaration of war. There was no need for harsh words or theatrical flourish. When Nethan simply said, "We hereby declare war on the world government," his calm, even tone cut through the chatter at naval headquarters like a blade, and silence fell instantly. Across the globe, countless viewers watching the live video feed went rigid, their minds blank with shock. A declaration of war against the very institution that had ruled this world for 800 years. Under the world's eyes, the Ghost Hand pirates, once dismissed as common brigands, had at last bared their fangs. Their target wasn't one of the four emperors, nor the elusive pirate king. It was far grander, the world government itself. From that moment on, calling Rhodes and Wonguo mere pirates felt like a cruel understatement. Whether the final outcome favored one side or the other, Nethin's proclamation had set two colossal powers on a collision course, a fight for ultimate dominance. In the war room, seasoned admirals like Aokiji stared in disbelief, their faces draining of color. Others stood frozen, unable to tear their eyes from the screen. "Are they serious?" someone whispered. "The Ghost Hand pirates have declared war." Nethin's eyes widened in shock. He never imagined Rhodes would appear here, on this fog-shrouded battlefield, to openly renounce the world government and declare war on the Navy. A declaration of war against the entire world? Unheard of. Beside him, the green pheasant's pupils constricted as disbelief and awe flickered across his face. He knew exactly what Nethin had just proclaimed. To date, not even the Revolutionary Army had publicly challenged the world government like this. And now Rhodes had. Admiral Kizaru, normally so unflappable and sardonic, couldn't hide the tremor in his voice. His tone still carried that trademark drawl, but there was an unmistakable undercurrent of fear. Nethin lowered his head and met Sengoku's steady gaze. The moment of reckoning had arrived. War had officially begun. It was time to erase Navy headquarters from the world's map. Chapter 435. One Man Against 10,000. Arrogance. High above the island, Admiral Warring States leveled a fierce glare at Nethin. His fists clenched so tightly his knuckles whitened, and a dangerous edge of anger flashed across his face. "This island lies at the very heart of the world," he bellowed. "For all those who stand against evil, it is our Navy's solemn duty to guard this place. The name of justice will never be sullied. Don't dare spread lies to drag us down." Nethin stood unmoved beneath the Admiral's roar. Slowly, he opened his hands, empty but brimming with quiet power, and spoke in a calm, measured tone. "You're mistaken. This isn't a lie, nor a declaration of war. It's a warning." No sooner had the words left his lips than Nethin raised his arms and curled his fingers like claws. A low, ominous hum rolled across the island, vibrating through every stone. Those who remembered the furious force Nethin had wielded to slay Blackbeard knew this tremor all too well. The same twisting energy, once buried deep in the earth by Rhodes, was stirring again. Then came the crack, a sound like the world itself splitting in two. From the sky, the naval headquarters seemed to shudder and buckle, as if gripped by an invisible giant's hand and wrung like a rag. Foundations heaved, walls splintered. "Damn you!" Admiral Warring States roared into the chaos, but his defiant cry was drowned out by the cataclysm swallowing the island. John Guo's veins bulged with fury. With a thunderous roar, he sprang into the air and, in an instant, assumed the form of a colossal Buddha. His palms smashed down toward Nethin like an avalanche. The shockwaves swept across the square, blasting through the crowd and striking Nethin high above them, nearly tearing him from the sky. But Nethin stood his ground. He brought up a single backhand, and the two forces collided in a blinding explosion of energy. The very air around them seemed to ripple like water, waves of power radiating outward as if the heavens themselves had split apart. A deafening thunderclap rolled across the city, rattling eardrums and sending terrified onlookers sprawling. The twisting distortion in Nethin's backhand bent and compressed Zhang Guo's palm strike, forcing it to buckle and shatter on the spot. The giant Buddha form wavered, then collapsed as its creator staggered backward, breathless and enraged. On the square below, two shadowy figures sprang into action. The first, known only as Peach Rabbit, morphed into a lithe, crouching beast bristling with lethal intent. The second, T-Dolphin, became a swirling shimmer of aquatic grace, fins glinting like sharpened steel. With a single nod to each other, they lunged skyward, converging on Nethin in a deadly pincer attack. Nethin didn't spare a glance for the two of them. A loose strand of his hair lifted on the wind, and with it, the hurricane spirit that had been coiling around him exploded outward. In an instant, that tiny vortex swelled into a world-spanning tempest, roaring across the battlefield toward Tau. Impossible! Rabbit and T-Dolphin were the first to be caught in its path, thrown aside like rag dolls. Scores of captains from the Navy headquarters were blasted off their feet, disappearing into the maelstrom. Even the major and lieutenant generals struggled desperately to stay upright against the gale. Tao's sword flashed in his hand. "What is this?" Caught off guard, he braced himself and slashed at the oncoming storm. His blade unleashed a titanic arc of sword energy, cleaving the hurricane in two. The wind stuttered, the howling paused, if only for a heartbeat. But the hurricane spirit had no physical form. No matter how exquisite Tao's swordsmanship or how legendary his blade, he could only deplete its magical energy, not destroy its essence. With a deafening roar, the cyclone reformed behind the split, surging forward once more, as though nothing had slowed it down. Nethan knelt on the shattered quay, wind howling all around him. With a low, resonant hum, the raging vortex overhead began to coalesce. The air inside the whirlwind thickened until it split into countless razor-thin blades of shimmering blue. They flashed and spun, raining down like a merciless storm. Beside him, Peach Rabbit and T-Dolphin braced themselves, weapons raised to parry the deadly gale. Each blade they struck sparked against metal, sending showers of sparks into the swirling dust. "Stop me if you can," Garp roared from the rubble, jaw clenched. He leapt toward the eye of the hurricane, determination burning in his eyes. But before he could reach them, Nethan's gaze flickered with an eerie calm. Below the twisting winds, the fractured remains of the Navy headquarters island began to swell, as if something colossal stirred beneath its foundations. Then, with an earth-shaking crack, the ground split open, and a gargantuan hand burst forth, its palm as vast as the sky itself. Time seemed to slow as that titanic hand shot upward. Garp, caught midair, never saw it coming. The palm closed around him in an instant, snaring him like a toy in a child's grasp. With bone-shattering force, it slammed him down onto the ruined harbor. The impact sent splinters of wood and stone flying in all directions. Garp's cry echoed against the walls of debris before fading into silence, and the towering hand withdrew, leaving the quay trembling underfoot. In the sudden stillness, Nethan stood among the ruined pillars and shattered docks, blue wind blades still dancing in the air. His storm had passed, along with any doubt that he would see victory this day. Moments later, the fractured earth beneath the Navy headquarters stilled its collapse and began to writhe, as though a gargantuan beast trapped in a pit were clawing its way free. Under the wide-eyed horror of every onlooker, a hellish colossus, its form born from nearly half of the shattered fortress, surged upward. Its massive torso rose like a nightmare come to life, and one enormous palm slammed down, pinning Garp to the ground. "Damn you, get off me, old man!" Garp roared. With a savage burst of strength, he drove his fist into the rocky hand, shattering it into jagged fragments. He lunged for the fissure, intent on escape, but before he could clear the rubble, another giant hand came crashing down to stop him. The soil fruit of the natural system? Admiral Sengoku watched the spectacle, his face paling. Neither the hurricane force nor this living rock giant appeared in any Navy records. It could only mean one thing: the Ghost Hand pirates boast at least 2 more top-tier fighters. No wonder Rhodes dared to assault the Navy headquarters alone. Twisted Fist. Nethan cut off the distortion field that had shrouded the entire island. In the next instant, he vaulted into the sky and materialized directly before Fleet Admiral Sengoku. He drew back his arm and delivered a single, earth-shattering punch, pouring 10% of his distortion energy into a strike fueled by every ounce of his strength. From the start, Nethan's goal wasn't the island of Marineford itself. Even if he tore its ground to pieces, the Navy could simply relocate its headquarters somewhere else. No, the true target was Sengoku. If the fleet admiral fell, no successor, however capable, could instantly fill the void in raw power that would follow. Sengoku's face contorted at the sheer force roaring toward him, but there was no time to dodge. Nethan's twisted fist struck like the tremor of Whitebeard's quake fruit, an unavoidable, all-encompassing barrage. With a bellow that shook the heavens, Sengoku unleashed his own trump card. The colossal form of the phantom beast's giant Buddha blossomed around him, every inch of its hulking silhouette blackened by Busoshoku haki. He thrust both palms forward, channeling every grain of his power into a titanic shockwave. The two forces met in a single deafening explosion, distortion energy crashing against haki, each combatant pouring their will into that one decisive clash. Dust and debris spiraled outward as the sky itself seemed to split, and for a heartbeat the world held its breath at the collision of these two incredible powers. The impact of their clash was nothing short of cataclysmic. In a heartbeat, a shockwave radiated outward, tearing through every direction. Sailors were hurled from the decks, generals at headquarters spitting blood as they flew backward. With a deafening crack, the very ground between Rhodes and the Warring States Naval HQ split open in a gaping chasm. Seawater surged back onto the island, carving a new river through the shattered earth as stone and steel crumbled in the roar. At the heart of it all stood Nethan, his distortion power blazing at 950 points, already eclipsing even Whitebeard at his prime. No matter how fiercely the Warring States warrior in Buddha form fought back, he simply couldn't withstand the relentless warping energy. In an instant, his protective shockwave shattered, the golden aura of his transformation fractured, and the distortion field ripped him free from his exalted guise. He reverted to his original form and was flung backward, crashing among the ruins. He landed hard, coughed up blood, and lay motionless amid splintered wood and crumbled stone, defeated by the unstoppable force Nethan had unleashed. Chapter 436. The air trembled as Sengoku, the fleet admiral of the Marines, took the full force of Rhodes's assault. Countless naval officers on the deck froze in horror. Sengoku was under a direct, unrelenting barrage, and they dared not charge in. No ordinary seaman could survive the whirlwind manifestation that Rhodes commanded. On either side of the battlefield, two titanic figures towered like gods, a colossus of granite and another wreathed in roaring wind. Each stood higher than the marine fortress itself, dwarfing even the vice-admirals who defended its ramparts. In the distance, Admirals Okiji, Kizaru, and Akagi hunted down the remnants of the Whitebeard pirates with ruthless precision. They'd believed Rhodes to be the sole threat behind the pirate retreat, never imagining those rebels would feign defeat only to counterattack at the rear. Now, Rhodes held the entire Marine headquarters at bay by sheer force of will, rock and tempest beating against the walls in thunderous rhythm. The crisis grew more desperate by the second, until Nethan appeared. He moved with uncanny calm, his hand tightening on the hilt of his sword. With a single silent exhale, he leapt skyward. The blade in his grip erupted in a cascade of shimmering petals, glimmering like cherry blossoms caught in a storm. "Sakura feather slash!" he cried, and a graceful, razor-sharp arc cleaved through the hurricane's vortex. Wind and stone shattered apart as his petal blades carved a path straight toward Rhodes, turning the tide of battle in a single, breathtaking moment. Section 1. Seizing the moment, T-Dolphin slipped past the Hurricane Incarnation's defenses. From that distance, he could only rely on his fire gun, so he raised it and squeezed off 3 long-range shots at Nethan. T-Dolphin prided himself on his future sight, but today, Nethan's own precognition proved even sharper. His observation haki outmatched the Dolphin's in both precision and clarity. And that wasn't all. Nethan's mastery of armament haki had reached astounding heights. In sheer force, it rivaled Carp's legendary coating, and in raw strength, it was on par with Kaido himself. Whoosh! 3 ebony-tinged bullets, each sheathed in dark armament haki, streaked through the air toward him. Nethan didn't flinch. He didn't dodge. He didn't even slow down. With his eyes fixed ahead, he charged straight at the heart of the Warring States front. Clang! 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 The bullets slammed into his chest like hammer strikes on steel, sending sparks flying in all directions. When the flashes died, his flesh was marked by 3 shallow dents, and that was all. Nethan pressed on without hesitation. How? Dolphin stared in disbelief. His future sight far outmatched Nethan's. He should have been able to anticipate every dodge and counter. In theory, when 2 opponents both predict the future, their visions cancel one another out. Yet Nethan's arrogance, fruit, and raw physical power simply overrode Dolphin's attack. The impact rocked the entire area, sending debris flying and toppling the structure behind the naval headquarters. Dolphin collapsed beneath a pile of rubble, coughing as he pressed a hand to his chest. Through the haze of dust, he sensed Nethan charging straight at him. Gritting his teeth, Dolphin forced himself to his feet and activated the Phantom Beast Renren fruit. Instantly, a towering golden Buddha materialized overhead, its surface gleaming with divine light. With a thunderous roar, the colossal Buddha swung a massive fist at Nethan, who met the blow head-on, driving his own punch into the Buddha's knuckles. Boom! The collision sent shockwaves rippling through the battlefield once more. If Nithan's first strike could be blamed on Admiral Rhodes' momentary lapse, his second left no doubt. Rhodes wasn't a match. The chasm between their powers yawned wide. Realizing how badly things were going, the T-Dolphin lunged forward to help. But before he could close the gap, Nithan drew back his fist and unleashed a twisting shockwave. Thanks to their ability to glimpse, and then rewrite, the immediate future, both men could foresee incoming attacks and cancel them. Still, when that blow hit, the T-Dolphin only just managed to raise his arms in time. The force tore him off his feet, hurling him backward with such violence that he smashed through half a dozen buildings before coming to rest. Today, Nithan's strength had reached a terrifying new height. The T-Dolphin might rank just below the likes of Akainu, but against Nethan he was hopelessly outclassed and no longer in a position to interfere. Nethan stood unmoved on the deck, the wind from the failed T-Dolphin attack still rippling around him. The technique should have scattered him like dandelion seeds, but he'd absorbed it as casually as a man catching a falling leaf. The gap between him and his opponent, one of the 7 warlords, the so-called warring states, was terrifying. In hockey prowess, in physical toughness, in brute strength, Nethan outclassed his rival by more than a full grade. Observers could barely believe their eyes. How could one man so completely dominate a warlord? Even titans like Aokiji and Akainu had managed only to slow Nethan down. By wielding their frost and magma devil fruits, they'd imposed temporary restraints, enough to wrench Whitebeard's experience pack away from him, netting 950 points. Under their power distortion field, they'd disturbed Nethan's flow, but never truly held him. Everyone knew there was normally an upper limit to strength. A powerhouse like Carp, even with the Momo fruit, couldn't multiply his muscle or speed 100-fold. Gaining even 10% was a Herculean effort. But Nethan laughed at such caps. Through the world's talent system, he simply kept raising his own ceiling, refining his body and hockey until he teetered on the brink of the inhuman. The Warring States commander, chest heaving, dared not hesitate. He slammed his palms together, steam and embers curled around his forearms as he unleashed a devastating palm strike at Nethan. The very air screamed under its force. Nethan's eyes flashed. He braced himself, every muscle coiled like a spring, ready to counter. In a battle where only one fighter knew no bounds, the clash of their wills would decide the fate of all who watched. Facing the onslaught of Sengoku's Warring States barrage, Nethan's expression stayed perfectly calm. He raised his arm, letting the edge of his black cloak sweep through the air. Sengoku stared, jaws agape, as the roaring wave of energy, deflected by nothing more than that subtle gesture, veered off its course. The redirected torrent crashed into the adjacent town with devastating force. Stone walls shuddered and fell, wooden buildings splintered, and dozens of naval soldiers caught in the blast were sent flying, spitting blood as they hit the ground. Sengoku staggered backward, disbelief etched on his face. In the past, Nithan's distortion powers had never been strong enough to twist such a tremendous attack. Now, however, his mastery of distortion eclipsed every other force, allowing him to bend even the fiercest onslaught at will. Without a word, Nithan stepped forward. He curled his right fingers into a tight fist and launched a punch. Before the first blow even registered, his left hand followed with another crushing strike. Boom, boom. His fists landed like hammers on a sandbag, relentless and precise. In less than a second, Nethan unleashed 3 consecutive punches, each one more powerful than the last. Nethan's 3 successive punches seemed to tear at the very fabric of space before crashing into Sengoku's chest and abdomen. Where each blow struck, his golden armor caved in, sending brilliant flashes of light dancing across the courtyard. Then, blood spurted from Sengoku's mouth, and he was flung backward like a rag doll. Even his legendary physique couldn't withstand such overwhelming force. Inside him, organs were twisted and torn by the violent distortion. Coughing up blood, Sengoku struggled to his feet, eyes wide with disbelief. He'd always known Nethan was formidable. He'd already roughed down Whitebeard and Kaido, but nothing had prepared him for this. The last time Nethan had attacked Marine headquarters, His plan had been to breach the fortress walls. At that moment, Aokiji and Kizaru had been pressing their assault on the city, and both Akainu and Garp were elsewhere. By the skin of their teeth, the Marines had managed to repel him. But this was different. Here, face to face, Sengoku had thrown everything he had at Nethan. And still, he'd been utterly outmatched. He stared in shock, breath ragged. How could one man's power be so absolute? You should know that Nethan once served as an admiral and clashed with Whitebeard at the height of his power on multiple occasions. Now, as a marshal, his strength has scarcely diminished. He could still stand toe-to-toe with Whitebeard at his peak. Yet even he is powerless to stop Luo now. Chapter 437, Invincible. Invincible. They'd all assumed that with Sengoku and Garp standing guard at Marine headquarters, a lone swordsman like Nethan couldn't possibly make a dent. Yet within minutes, Sengoku himself was driven to the brink of collapse, and the sight stopped the other admirals cold. Aokiji and Kizaru, who had been hunting down the remnants of the Whitebeard pirates, exchanged horrified looks. If Sengoku fell to Nethan's blade, the consequences would be unthinkable. Here, on the very grounds of the world government's naval stronghold, the balance of power was tipping. By striking at Sengoku, Nethan had effectively declared open war on the world government in front of every eye on the Grand Line. Should he manage to kill, or even fatally wound, an admiral in the heart of their territory, the ripple effects would engulf the entire world. Nations that had so far kept their distance from the world government might seize the moment to rise up under new banners. Even those firmly allied could reconsider their loyalty and break away. A tide of chaos threatened to surge across every ocean, and at the center of it all stood Nethan, blade in hand, truly unstoppable, invincible, or so it seemed. Unseen forces already began to stir, preparing 100 different responses around the globe to the challenge he posed to the very foundation of the world government. Admiral Kizaru was the first to break off the pursuit of the Whitebeard pirates. In an instant, his entire form shimmered into golden light, and then he reappeared above Nethan. With a roar, he hurled an 8-legged Chiongo beast toward him, hoping to halt Nethan's single-minded charge after the warlord's vessel. But Nethan didn't hesitate. He lifted his fist and met Kizaru's ambush head-on. The impact ripped through the void with the force of a meteor strike, a deafening boom, a shockwave that buckled space itself. Golden laser beams and energy blasts scattered like fireworks overhead, but Nethan's punch cut through them as though they were nothing. Before Kizaru could even process what was happening, the Chiongo beast, its bulk glowing bright yellow, exploded under that tremendous blow, its fragments raining away as the admiral was flung skyward. Without pausing to gloat, Nethan landed in a crouch and pressed on. In only a few strides, he reached the hull of the warlord's flagship and unleashed another devastating punch. The warship shuddered, its steel plating cracked, and sailors cried out in alarm as blood spurted from the admiral's blown-out defenses. Bowed by the force, the vessel pitched upward, then spiraled, sending everyone on deck tumbling into chaos. Nethan straightened, eyes blazing. This was only the beginning. "Stop those ghostly hands, now!" The cry rang out, and Marines across the battlefield finally panicked. No one had expected Nethan's strength to be so overwhelming. By his own power alone, he had already laid low Fleet Admiral Sengoku, blasted apart Vice Admiral T-Dolphin, and obliterated the Yellow Monkey. On this field of war, he was simply unstoppable. "Ice! Freeze!" Admiral Aokiji's voice cracked through the chaos as he spotted disaster unfolding behind him. Abandoning his pursuit of the Whitebeard pirates, he turned at once to confront the new threat. With a sweep of his arm, 2 massive columns of glacial air materialized and hurtled straight for Nethan. Unfazed, Nethan's response was a single devastating punch. Ka-clang! Ka-clang! The twin pillars of ice shattered on impact, splintering into a million glittering shards as though struck by a meteor. In the wake of the explosion, a rippling, spiraling force erupted from Nethan's fist, sweeping across the deck like an unstoppable tornado. It wrapped tightly around Admiral Green Pheasant, crushing him in its vortex. With a final thunderous crack, the admiral was torn into fragments of ice and rock, flung clean out of Marine headquarters. General Green Pheasant had fallen before Nethan's might, yet another testament to his fearsome power on this battlefield. Nethin's fizz. He cut through the air so fast that the surrounding Marines barely had time to register his movement. Moments later, Admirals Aokiji and Kizaru were both sent sprawling, each down by a single, devastating blow. A stunned hush fell over the nearby ranks. No one could believe that the Navy's two most powerful fighters had been felled so effortlessly. This was no mere disparity of strength. It was a chasm between tiers of power. Without glancing at the fallen admirals, Nethin turned his steely gaze toward the heart of the battlefield. His expression was calm, almost indifferent. Today he had vowed, at least one admiral would die, and nothing would stand in his way. High above the chaos, Admiral Akainu gritted his teeth as he watched his comrades collapse. With both Aokiji and Kizaru incapacitated, he alone remained to face Nethin, and the Whitebeard pirates were already slipping beyond reach. Frustration twisted his features, but there was no turning back. He abandoned his pursuit of the pirates and roared back into the fight. Clashing his fists together, Akainu unleashed a volcanic eruption of magma. Rivers of molten fury tore across the shattered plaza, scorching everything in their path as they surged toward Nethin. But the young warrior was ready. He planted his feet and brought his fist crashing into the onrushing lava. In a thunderous explosion of rock and heat, Nethin shattered the magma wave, the ground trembling beneath the force of the blow, and Akainu's next move was already born in fire. Nethin's fist slammed into Akainu with earth-shattering force. The molten magma Akainu had formed instantly exploded outward in a torrent of searing liquid, streaking across the battlefield like a volcanic storm. Even as the admiral braced himself, roaring and pouring every ounce of his power into resistance, Nethin's blow simply overpowered him. The warp-twisting energy tore at Akainu's body, flaying off molten rock in great hissing sheets. At last, the admiral's form gave way completely. He liquefied into pure magma, collapsed in on himself, and was hurled upside down off the island in a blazing eruption. Without pausing, Nethin pivoted and charged toward Fleet Admiral Warring States. In that instant, every eye on the field, among Nami and the others, the Whitebeard pirates, even the Navy's lieutenant commanders, fixed on him with identical astonishment. Shock rippled through the crowd. A single punch powerful enough to send an admiral flying, who in all the seas had ever accomplished such a feat. In more than 800 years since the world government's founding, no one had dared wreak havoc in the very heart of naval headquarters like this. Even Fleet Admiral Warring States could barely stand toe-to-toe with him, and the three admirals themselves were battered time and again by Nethin's relentless onslaught. Even though Nethin's posture remained composed, betraying no trace of ferocity, he loomed over the battlefield like a storm cloud blotting out the sun. His face held no anger, only a quiet despair that filled every onlooker with dread. Under the trembling, horrified gazes of the gathered ranks, he advanced toward Admiral Sengoku. With a thunderous stride, he closed the distance and unleashed another devastating punch that shattered the air itself. Sengoku had just staggered back from his brutal clash with Huang Yuan Qingji and his allies, using that moment to draw in a ragged breath and steel himself. Meanwhile, Nethin's relentless barrage had already driven Qingji and the other marshals to their limits, and his own breathing was beginning to falter. Yet none of that mattered now. When his fist struck Sengoku, the impact tore through armor and bone alike. Sengoku coughed up blood and was hurled backward, crashing against the deck in a mangled heap. This display of power, it was beyond anything anyone had ever witnessed. High above the chaos, Nami clung to a small cleft atop a colossal stone giant. From her perch, she watched Nethin, cloaked in black, rip through the naval headquarters with effortless brutality. Mind was blank with shock. Even her darkest days on the Grand Line, even the deadliest trials in the East Blue, had never prepared her for a force like this. Power and status go hand in hand. At the summit, you glimpse the true terror of the sea's mightiest forces. An admiral, Aokiji for example, can obliterate an entire ship with a single gesture, leaving nothing but ruin in his wake. Yet in Nethin's presence, these once invincible figures shattered at a single blow. This is the absolute pinnacle of power in this world. Unstoppable, invincible. Not a soul within the Navy's headquarters, an arena that once struck fear into every pirate, could stand against him. Rumbling cloud soared. Ice Age! Blood stained the corners of Aokiji's and Kizaru's mouths as they hurled themselves back into the fray, unleashing their deadliest techniques in tandem against Nethan's rear. He didn't even flinch. With unwavering determination, Nethan pressed on toward Sengoku. Behind him, the dazzling golden blade and the swirling frost lay trapped within the warped space he commanded, utterly powerless to reach him. Nethan stood in the heart of the Navy's headquarters as if he were merely taking a leisurely stroll. Around him, the most formidable fighters the world had ever seen fell away like shadows. In that moment, even Rhodes, hailed as the strongest warrior alive, seemed insufficient to capture Nethan's true stature. A single word pulsed through everyone's minds: invincible. Chapter 438, Death in the Warring States Period. Kizaru and Aokiji exchanged worried glances. Neither the Admiral's blinding light beams nor his comrade's freezing ice had made so much as a scratch on Nethan. They well knew the young man's space spawn ability could nullify almost any attack, but it worked both ways. While it rendered Nethan untouchable, it also trapped him between dimensions, unable to strike back. Determined to break his defense, they braced themselves for a combined assault. Kizaru's golden light shimmered at full intensity, and Aokiji's chill crept across the deck. Just as they lunged forward, a streak of blue fire cut through the tension. In the next instant, a figure wreathed in azure flames hurtled past them and slammed a kick into Aokiji's waist, sending him sprawling. The newcomer's presence crackled with power, the legendary Phoenix Marco. "Marco!" The Navy's lieutenant general shouted, his voice cracking with surprise. "What are you doing here?" Marco twirled his flaming staff, a cocky smile tugging at his lips. "Declining help from the Whitebeard pirates? Not our style. You asked for backup against these so-called ghosts who've been hunting your fleet. Consider us even." He planted the staff firmly on the deck, blue flames dancing around its tip. "Now, admirals, shall we finish what we started?" With that, Phoenix Marco stepped between Nethan and the stunned admirals, the promise of a fierce counterattack lingering in the smoke-filled air. Vista's twin blades sliced through the air, forcing Admiral Kizaru to divert his light beams away from Aokiji. "That ghost hand move you used on Blackbeard's crew still needs paying for," Vista snarled. "If you don't settle up soon, you won't get a peaceful night's rest." Kizaru and Aokiji shot each other grim looks, but there was no time to argue. In the next instant, the sky was flooded with Kizaru's brilliant golden light, even as Aokiji's chilling aura spread out across the battlefield, frosting everything in its path. "Ho!" Marco's thunderous cry rang out. Azure Phoenix flames erupted around him as he surged straight at Aokiji. Right behind, Vista, Fire Fist Ace, and the rest of the Whitebeard pirates roared and charged in unison. Once more, Whitebeard's champions and Admiral Kuzan clashed in a fearsome showdown. On a separate front, Fleet Admiral Sengoku was fighting for his life. Admiral Akainu leapt to his aid, but both were grievously wounded. Even together, they stood little chance against Nethan's onslaught. Each time Nethan's magma-hardened fist struck the ground, molten rock splintered outward, tearing deep fissures into the deck. With every quake, the two warlords stumbled backward, struggling to hold their ground. Nethan stood cloaked in black, fists raised, as he bore down on Fleet Admiral Akainu and Admiral Sengoku, forcing them onto the defensive. Without warning, Akainu roared, "Meteor volcano!" Magma surged wildly over half his body, uncontrolled power, unleashed without concern for the ruined Navy headquarters or the lives still trapped within. He channeled every ounce of destruction straight at Nethan. Boom! Nethan met the torrent of molten fury with a single, unassuming punch. His fist struck the roiling magma like a boulder crashing into a tidal wave, ripping it into a vortex of churning flame before the molten whirlwind collapsed in on itself with an earth-shaking crack. Before the aftershock could clear, Nethan spun his arm in a sweeping backhand. The strike collided midair with Sengoku's shockwave fist, sending a series of visible ripples across the smoldering ruins as the two forces annihilated one another. Boom! He didn't follow Sengoku's retreating form. In one fluid motion, Nethan pivoted and unleashed a devastating blow at Akainu instead. The air around his fist bent and shimmered under the sheer force of the strike, a silent testament to the raw power he wielded. Akainu's condition was barely any better than Sengoku's. In his earlier clash with Whitebeard, He'd almost been knocked out, and not long after, he'd taken a devastating blow from Rhodes. Both admirals were fighting just to keep standing. Damn, it couldn't be true. Nethan's fist hurtled toward him, and Sakazuki ground his teeth as he brought up a magma-charged arm to block. But stopping that blow was like trying to hold a speeding locomotive in place. The force crushed him, shoved him off balance, no different from a man trying to resist a runaway bulldozer. His eyes blazed with fury and disbelief. How could a mere pirate from the West Blue, a former hunter-turned-outlaw, wield power that rivaled Whitebeard's? Rage roared inside him, but resentment alone couldn't erase the gap between himself and Rhodes. In less than a heartbeat, Sakazuki's body ruptured. His flesh dissolved into a writhing mass of magma, and he was sent hurtling backward in a blazing arc. Sakazuki, the fearsome red dog, went flying under Nethan's punch. Sengoku's eyes widened in horror. The sheer force of that blow had sent Akainu reeling, and when Nethan calmly turned to face him, Sengoku felt a cold dread seize his heart. Recovering slowly from the impact, Red Dog lay sprawled on the deck, temporarily stunned. Sengoku saw his chance and sprang forward, planting his feet on the fractured ground. With inhuman speed, he closed the distance to Nethan. Boom! His first strike crashed into the stone beneath Nethan's boots, shattering it into jagged fragments. Boom! His second blow smashed into the colossal Buddha statue towering behind Nethan, cleaving half of its massive form and burying it deep in the plaza floor. When the dust settled, Nethan stood unscathed amidst the ruins, an aura of invincibility radiating from him. Sengoku's chest tightened with regret. He had caught Nethan once before, and, instead of executing him, had locked him away in Advanced City. Every opportunity to eradicate this threat had slipped through his fingers, missed strikes in moments of weakness, hesitations born of overconfidence. Now, facing Nethan's unleashed power, Sengoku realized the terrible price of his mercy. Rhodes has finally come into his own, a living fortress so overwhelming that he now eclipses even the legendary Whitebeard at his height. Back in the dawn of the Great Pirate Era, before the four emperors had even appeared, Whitebeard alone held the balance of power in the New World. The Navy dared not challenge him. Today, Rhodes surpasses that once unassailable force. Whitebeard's strength was purely defensive, enough to deter the Navy, but never to seize victory. Rhodes, by contrast, can turn the tables, dictate terms, and actually crush his enemies. Sengoku, long the Navy's unshakable pillar, has been driven to the brink. Seeing their former fleet admiral teeter on the edge of defeat, Garp roared in fury. He launched himself forward, his fist cleaving through half the rock giant's body as he barreled toward Rhodes's position. By now, Sengoku was effectively out of the fight, half his bulk buried in the ground, utterly immobilized. Yet even as Garp raced to his aid, Rhodes met him with the same cold, unflinching calm he'd shown the entire world. With barely a flicker of emotion, he swung a single devastating punch toward Garp's onrushing fist. Boom, fist against fist, power crashing into power. Caperna's armament hockey, now at its peak, even edges out Nethan's own. In terms of raw power, it's superior, but all that pales before Nethan's spiraling assault. The twisting energy he unleashes carries enough force to rip everything apart. In a heartbeat, it shatters Garp's armament hockey, smashes through his defenses, and sends the legendary marine hero staggering backward. In fact, Garp is the only one who doesn't get sent flying clean off his feet, and even that looks like a miracle. Nethan watches Garp collapse, then calmly turns to face Fleet Admiral Sengoku. His gaze is ice-cold, his voice controlled and even. "Admiral," he says, "you may not know my name yet, but you will. Every order sent to hunt me down, every attempt to suppress me, came from the highest office in the Navy, the Marshal of the Flow, and anyone who dares to stand in my way will pay that debt in full." Under the eyes of countless onlookers, some frozen in horror, others seized by fear, all wearing ashen expressions, Garp's thunderous roar met Akainu's savage fury. It was already too late to stop what was coming. In that moment, Nethan stepped forward. It was the 22nd year of the Great Pirate Era. At Marineford, the Navy's headquarters, the current Fleet Admiral, the Navy's supreme commander and ultimate decision-maker, presided over the Summit War. Here, amid the thunder of cannons and the clash of titans, destinies would be forged in blood. This was no mere skirmish. It was a fight to the death. Chapter 439. chasing and killing Akainu. The moment the news broke, Marine headquarters fell into a deathly silence. Every officer froze in mid-step. Even the surviving admirals clasped their heads in disbelief as their morale shattered. The fleet admiral, long thought unassailable, had been slain, struck down by Rhodes and his ghost hand pirates, right in the heart of the Navy's own command center. Across the globe, millions watched the live feed and found themselves staring blankly at their screens. Some trembled in sheer terror, some cheered with dark elation, and some simply stood rooted to the spot, utterly unsure what to feel. To those who feared the rising pirate threat, it was confirmation of their worst nightmares. To the oppressed masses chafing under the world government's heel, it felt like the first crack in a long night of tyranny. And to the bewildered, it offered no clear path forward. If Rhodes's earlier proclamation of war had seemed little more than bluster, the cold-blooded execution of the fleet admiral made his intentions horribly real. This was no empty threat. It was the opening salvo in a conflict that would shake the very foundations of the world. Nithin's power had never been clearer. At Navy headquarters, he'd stormed in alone, slicing through guards, confronting the admiral, and ending the man's life with a single, decisive stroke. Cameras at the scene captured every second, broadcasting his triumph across the seas. In all 800 years, few forces had ever threatened the world government so seriously. Yet today, between Rhodes and the kingdom of Wangguo, that threat had finally arrived. Somewhere far away, in a nondescript whitewashed town, Long, the leader of the Revolutionary Army, watched the footage on a battered screen. He rubbed his temples, trying to process what he'd seen. He, too, dreamed of overthrowing the corrupt regime that ruled the world. But in that moment, he felt the yawning gulf between his ragtag fighters and Wangguo's unstoppable juggernaut. Wangguo's aim was not merely to dismantle the world government. Their ambition reached far beyond. They intended to conquer every corner of the globe and install themselves as the new world power. Under those circumstances, what chance did the Revolutionary Army really have? Even if Long mustered the courage to propose an alliance, begging Wangguo for support against their common enemy, he knew they would never see his revolution as anything more than collateral. Staring at the screen, Long felt a cold certainty settle over him. The world was about to change, but not in the way he'd hoped. Kurla's heart pounded as she stood beside the great crimson dragon, its wings folded in uneasy silence. Smoke and ash curled into the sky from the shattered harbor below, and at the center of the wreckage stood a lone figure draped in a black cloak. Nithin. The man who had just cut down Admiral Wangguo in a single merciless stroke. Orange hair whipping in the wind, Kurla stared at him in disbelief. If the world government truly fell today, the Revolutionary Army would find itself in a bitter predicament, branded enemies by whatever new order rose from the ashes. Yet as she watched Nithin's silent vigil, she realized with dawning horror it wouldn't be the revolutionaries toppling the regime, but Rhodes and the allied nations. At Marine headquarters, a heavy stillness had settled over the command tower. Word had spread. Fleet Admiral Sengoku was dead. From a distance, Marco and the surviving captains of Whitebeard's fleet, Apu, Blamenko, Vista, and the rest, stood with grim faces. Nearby, the former admirals Aokiji Kuzan and Kizaru, now generals in the old regime, watched through broken windows. Even they felt the weight of defeat, though the fall of a warlord of the sea scarcely registered after Whitebeard's demise. In the courtyard, Marines in pristine whites knelt holden by shock and fear. They had lived an entire lifetime under the shadow of Nithin's name, first as a myth, then as a whisper, and now as a nightmare come true. Someone dare to murmur, "What's next? Him!" Among the tens of thousands of eyes trained on the courtyard steps, Nithin moved with calm precision. He retracted his dark gaze, letting it follow the sun's last rays as they dipped beneath the horizon. The world held its breath, and in that moment the balance of power shifted once and for all. Nithin surveyed the battlefield for a heartbeat, then dropped to the sand just a few yards from Admiral Akainu. Blood seared from a gash above his brow and stained the corner of his mouth, but his eyes were cold and unflinching. That calm, unreadable expression sent a chill through Akainu's veins. Nithin had just slain Admiral Sengoku, despite the frantic interference of every other admiral, with scarcely 1/3 of his stamina spent. He still had enough strength left to tear this whole war zone apart. Without warning, Nethin's foot snapped against the ground in a single, explosive push. He vanished in a blur of air and reappeared directly in front of Akainu. His right fist, wreathed in coiling Busoshoku haki, rocketed forward. Akainu's eyes widened. Even Sengoku had struggled to withstand one of Nethin's blows, and now there was no one left to intervene. Yet Akainu had his own trump card, the magma fruit. As his hardened magma skin locked horns with Nethin's armament haki, each force partially negated the other. Though Akainu's raw physique and defenses couldn't match Sengoku's legendary endurance, the magma's innate heat resistance, bolstered by haki, would blunt much of the impact. The two forces crashed together in a thunderous boom that shook the ground beneath them and left both fighters locked in a deadly, explosive stalemate. Nethin's punch slammed into Admiral Akainu's magma-hardened arms. Akainu managed to lock forearms with him, but the force still blasted him backward into a spray of molten rock that spattered in every direction. "That's not good. Stop those ghost hands," the T-Dolphin shouted, his face going pale as he ordered the surrounding Navy officers into action. With Sengoku fallen, the Marines lurched into disarray. Vice Admiral Garp, momentarily frozen by the sight of his old comrade's defeat, clenched his teeth and shook himself out of his shock. "I'm still the Navy," he reminded himself. There would be no more hesitation. Gathering every ounce of strength, Garp's massive fist rocketed toward Nethin. But at that instant, the Hell Road Devil Fruit's earth and stone manifestation burst to life. A titanic hand of jagged rock lunged forward, wrapping around Garp's arm like a living mountain. "Leave him to me," the T-Dolphin cried, sprinting to intercept the monstrous stone limb. He shoved against its rocky fingers with all his might, wrenching Garp's arm free. Seizing the opening, Garp hurled himself back to Nethin's side. There was no time for words. He drove his knuckles straight into Nethin's ribs with a thunderous crack. "I warned you," Garp growled through gritted teeth. "One day, the Navy will regret underestimating me. And today, I'll see this headquarters sink beneath the sea." Nethin met Garp's charging figure with an eerily calm gaze. "If you're going to do it, then do it," he said softly. "I'm a ghost." Without another word, he curled his fingers into a fist and drove it straight at Garp's chest. Garp countered with his own blow, and, in the empty space between them, the two iron-hard fists collided like runaway locomotives slamming head-on. The impact tore through the air with a thunderous crack, as if Whitebeard himself had unleashed an earthquake Fruit's full might. Shockwaves radiated outward, twisting the earth and air into spiraling ripples. A deafening roar rang out as the ground beneath their feet split apart. Cracks raced like lightning toward the far edges of the naval headquarters. Seawater gushed in, swallowing walls and halls in an instant. What had once been proud, impregnable fortifications now resembled a sinking wreck, half buried, half submerged. Two yawning chasms rent the island into 4 fragments, and the rushing tide carved the Theta ruins to pieces. Amid the chaos, Nethin's voice cut through the roar like ice itself. "Ice Age!" The words hung in the air, an ominous promise that the island's destruction was only just beginning. A chill wind swept across the battlefield as the ice beneath every foot began to shatter. Realizing that no one could keep their footing much longer, Admiral Aokiji closed his eyes and summoned the full force of his Ice Age fruit powers. In an instant, the entire isle was locked in a sheet of solid ice, like a fragment of the Arctic transplanted into the tropics. But freezing the ground mattered little against the elite fighters on Rhodes's side. These were some of the world's strongest combatants, each trained to fight in any conditions. Many of Rhodes's seamen didn't even need solid footing to unleash their full strength, so Aokiji's gambit only disadvantaged the weaker naval units. Still, even the most confident admirals found themselves hesitant to press forward in this frigid trap. Among the chaos, Vice Admiral T-Dolphin, just a reserve officer until now, struggled to make an impact. If the likes of Dolphin found it hard to act, what chance did the other captains have? At that moment, the thunderous cracks of ice were drowned out by heavier, more brutal blows. Teng! 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 Each punch, landed by Rhodes, vibrated through the battlefield like a battering ram, and each time it was Marshal Garp who bore the brunt of it. With every thunderous punch, Garp's massive frame reeled backward, stumbling across the frozen ground. The ice fractured and spiked under his weight, gouged by the force of impact. Even the old sea dog's legendary resilience showed signs of strain. Gasping for breath, Garp winced as Rhodes unleashed another crushing blow. The world's strongest fist wasn't exactly what it used to be. I really am getting too old for this, he thought, taste of blood at the back of his throat. Then Rhodes's fist connected again, this time knocking Garp flat onto the ice. Pain shot through every bone in his body as the cold blade of the island sliced into his uniform. Gritting his teeth, Garp pushed himself upright, only to find Nethin, formerly called Ross, standing before him, a cold glint in his eye. Even as he was driven backward once more by Nethin's relentless assault, Garp couldn't help but stifle a rueful sigh. 20 years ago, the old admiral would have at least held his ground, if not emerged victorious. But now the gap between them felt insurmountable. It wasn't just youth or strength, it was the difference between who he had been and who he was today. In a clash of this magnitude, even legendary figures like Captain Marco, fresh from what looked like a crushing defeat, were unable to stand their ground against a Navy admiral's full-force assault. Yet when Nethin struck, Marco was sent sprawling, a clear sign that Nethin's strength outclassed the great Whitebeard pirate's former right hand. The gap between a captain and an admiral had never been more obvious. With a single earth-shaking punch, Nethin blasted Admiral Garp aside. He didn't pause to gloat. Instead, his eyes locked on a new threat, magma churning and twisting before him, coalescing into the terrifying form of Admiral Akainu. A roar tore from Nethin's lips as he surged forward, relentless and unhesitating. He'd come to this battlefield to settle the score at the very top, and 2 admirals weren't nearly enough to halt his advance. Today, the world government's finest would learn the true meaning of defeat.